The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is my favorite game of all time. The reasons are for another video, but if I had to summarize it in one sentence, it's that the game is magical. It has a feeling of exploration and immersion like no other, and it was an absolute revelation for the gaming industry, whose ripples can still be felt, even almost a decade after its release. So, of course, when Tears of the Kingdom was announced, I couldn't be happier. We had only ever gotten one direct mainline sequel to a Zelda game before, with Majora's Mask all the way back in 2000, a time I wasn't even alive for. Majora's Mask was so great because it was a direct sequel. Instead of building a bunch of new assets, they could instead focus on improving the previous game, which is what they did, giving us one of the best video games ever made. Tears of the Kingdom was the opportunity to do the same thing for Breath of the Wild, because while the game is a masterpiece, it has many flaws. The story, the dungeons, the final boss, everything about Rain, and so much more. Tears of the Kingdom had the potential to not only fix its predecessor's issues, but also iterate and introduce its own new novel concepts. If the game succeeded in those aspects, it would have undoubtedly been one of the best games ever made. But unfortunately, Tears of the Kingdom failed to fix the flaws of Forerunner, instead doubling down on many of its same issues. Aside from that, many of Tears of the Kingdom's ideas fell so flat, ultimately delivering what is to me one of the biggest disappointments in all of media. Before I start though, no matter what I say in this video, I want you to know I love Tears of the Kingdom. The magic of Breath of the Wild is still here. It's emerged like no other, and you should play it. If you love Breath of the Wild, you will love Tears of the Kingdom. There's no denying that. It is a fun game, just a very disappointing one. I'm going to cover nearly every part of the game, which means a massive spoiler warning. With that being said, this is why Tears of the Kingdom is disappointing. What a better place to start? Well, than at the beginning. The game starts with a 20-minute long, unskippable opening sequence. Well, at least the music and atmosphere is great. It really sets up the intrigue and threat of Ganondorf. It was also cool to see Link super powered up and interacting with Zelda in real time, something that was sorely lacking in the first game, even though this is the only time that happens in this game. After the events we'll cover in the story section, Link wakes up with his new arm, finds some clothes, and boom, a vast shot introducing us to Tears of the Kingdom. The opening of this game is obviously meant to parallel the opening of Breath of the Wild, but it does it a bit too closely. Link gets a mortal injury, he naps, the Forest Scrolls of a King guides us, we go to 4 shrines that gave us new runes, and are out. I can see what they were trying to do, gives a little callback to the last game, but it's too similar. We already had Breath of the Wild, so why couldn't Tears of the Kingdom take this opportunity to differentiate itself? If they still want to keep this part unskippable, what if we could fight Ganondorf? He would sever our arm, and then Raw would rescue us. The game could be called Link, Zelda Dies Twice. Anyways, only an hour in and the game is already being derivative. On top of that, Breath of the Wild starts much faster. It takes like 5 minutes at most to get you right into the Great Plateau, whereas Tears of the Kingdom takes around 20 minutes to get you into Great Sky Island. While 15 minutes isn't much time, it will discourage subsequent playthroughs and make them much more tedious because of all this junk before we can actually get to the good stuff. Maybe we could stomach the intro if the story was good, but I also just kind of think the Great Plateau is better than the Great Sky Island. The Great Plateau is one of the best parts of Breath of the Wild. It perfectly demonstrated why this open-ended Zelda formula was a good idea, while also introducing us to how this new Zelda works. On the other hand, the Great Sky Island isn't bad. It's easily the best Sky Island in the game, but I think it falls short in some aspects. Firstly, it's much more linear, but doesn't adhere it fully. Unlike the Great Plateau, where everything is completely open and it doesn't matter what order you do it in, you'll still have a great time. In the Great Sky Island, Ultra Hand is necessary. That's not a bad thing. I mean, Ultra Hand is basically the entire game. But the thing is, you don't need to get Ultra Hand first. You could go in whatever order you want, which hinders the island's potential. Suppose they force you to be linear and go in a certain order. Yeah, it'd be where the open world Zelda forced you to tutorial in a certain way, but it would at least ensure the developers could make engaging and clever puzzles because they know what you have. But here, they feel like kinda half-assed, because you could technically go for the Ascent Shrine first. It'll be a cumbersome and tedious experience, forcing you a ton of backtracking. This will eventually happen, as the island's open nature means some creative players will try to go out of order, whether they know they're doing it or not. They should have just gone the Great Plateau way and made it fully open, or committed to making it linear. This half and half way doesn't work. A big reason that contributes to the island's linearity is the design of it. Look at how it's built. It's a circular shape, pushing you towards the same path. That means basically everyone has the same experience on the island. Again, it contributes to subsequent playthroughs being less fun than subsequent playthroughs of Breath of the Wild, making the whole opening feel much more mundane. You could spend hours in the Great Plateau, having tons of fun, exploring, finding secrets, and doing things your way. But the Great Sky Island feels like a slog to get your runes as quickly as possible, because that sense of exploration isn't here. Due to linearity, getting lost and completely immersed in the world is much harder than the Great Plateau. Likewise, there's so much handholding on the island, which pales in comparison to the absolute freedom of the Great Plateau. The constant text and notifications hold the flow of the game for some pretty unnecessary reasons. On a more personal note, the Great Plateau's atmosphere was way better. It was so isolated and lonely. You'd maybe talk to the old man a few times, but aside from that, it was just you, the world, and your enemies. Conversely, there's Raru and tons of sonar devices on the Sky Island, making it feel much more civilized. While it's just a personal preference, I like the Great Plateau's atmosphere more because it helps build upon the game's theme of isolation and nature. In contrast, the Great Sky Island doesn't do much for its game's themes. Speaking of not doing much for the game, the Great Plateau was like a mini Hyrule that had snowy parts, grass sealed, ancient ruins, and shrines to prepare us for the actual game. The Great Sky Island is not a mini Hyrule. It's not even a mini Skyland. It's the biggest one in the game. Not only does that make other Skylands incredibly disappointing in comparison, but the Great Skyland is designed nothing like a normal Skyland, so it doesn't even prepare you for that. Unlike the Great Plateau, which excited me for the rest of the game, the Great Skyland worried me. But the Great Skyland does prepare for one thing: Ultra Hand. The entire island is basically one big Ultra Hand puzzle, which is very fitting for Tears of the Kingdom because, as said before, Ultra Hand is basically the whole game. The Great Skyland ends with you taking your very first dive into Hyrule. It's a great moment. The music, the visuals, the atmosphere are firing on all cylinders. But I don't think the game emphasizes how terrorizing this should be. This is a complete leap of faith. In Link's eyes, he has no paraglider and no idea what's down there. As far as he knows, there's a very small chance he survives. But the player doesn't really feel that terror. On the topic of no paraglider, that's the last issue with the Great Sky Island. It doesn't give you the paraglider. You can go right off the Great Sky Island and explore Hyrule without the paraglider. But good luck, since it's essential to so much of the game. Breath of the Wild just gave it to you as soon as you're done with the tutorial. Tears of the Kingdom instead wants to torture you because you have to go to look at landing and talk to Purah, who recaps everything that just happened for some reason. If it's an insult to my intelligence, like, nothing happened, why is this recap here? After talking to Purah, you go halfway through the castle and talk to then you go back to Purah and finally get the paraglider. The whole sequence is a slog. Coupled with the unskippable cutscene at the start and the Great Sky's linearity, Tears of the Kingdom has a much higher time investment to start than Breath of the Wild. It makes repeated playthroughs just a chore to start, which has to be a big reason why the game fell off so quickly compared to Breath of the Wild. But still, I did have fun in the Great Sky Island. It was clever design, and you could spend hours there. I just can't shake the feeling that it's a cheaper, inferior imitation of its predecessor. Items are integral to the Zelda game. In Breath of the Wild, though, we didn't really get items. Instead, we got these new things called runes. They were stasis, magnesis, cryonis, and bombs. Tears of the Kingdom does away with those and introduces some new runes, so let's cover them. Our leading man in terms of runes is Ultra Hand. It lets you carry, connect, and rotate basically anything in the game. Let's get this out of the way. Ultra Hand is fantastic. The number of possibilities it creates is unfathomable. Just go online and you'll find thousands of creative things you'll learn, from a recreation of Godzilla to intricate Korok torture devices. It's astonishing how much freedom the ability gives you to pick up anything in the game. I can't imagine how difficult it must have been to code this incredible mechanic. How it interacts with the world is astounding, and the physics feels so real. Everything has weight and makes sense. It feels like I took real physics and just plopped it right into the game. That one mechanic and physics engine deserves all the praise. It's one of the few areas where Tears of the Kingdom exceeds Breath of the Wild heavily. Ultra Hand is way better than Magnesis, and it'll be hard going back to Magnesis now that I've had the joy of experiencing Ultra Hand. However, I have two major issues with the rune. First, why would I ever use it? There was absolutely zero extrinsic reward for making these complicated contraptions. It's even discouraged because it uses more resources than battery. Why would I make a giant airship when I can attach two fans and a steering together to instantly get much faster and more efficient form of transportation? Secondly, the controls. It's so janky to use, the majority of your time with Ultra Hand you spent trying to make it work and not actually having fun. Link also sometimes target the build, not the Zoner device, destroying what you just made. While Ultra Hand is an excellent ability and definitely improved from Breath of the Wild, the amount of attention it was needed in development, coupled with how it attracts from many of the game's other systems, caused it to severely undermine the rest of the game. The next ability you get, or that I got, is Fuse. Quick side tangent, but why is Fuse not a part of Ultra Hand? I mean, they both stick things together. Same for auto build. These two feel like features that are part of Ultra Hand, but then they realized they had too few runes, so they just split the biggest one into smaller pieces. These three definitely could have just been one rune. If they wanted 6 runes that bad, then they should have brought back some Breath of the Wild runes, like bombs, because bomb arrows and time bombs are definitely not a fair place in Breath of the Wild bombs. But anyways, Fuse lets you connect your weapons to any material, from the shard of a dragon to rock. The Fuse ability responded to one of the biggest criticisms of Breath of the Wild, the breakable weapons. Personally, I like breakable weapons, and think it made the game better. Still, many people say it hindered the game by discouraging combat. Fuse responds to these complaints by making it so every monster drops parts you can fuse to your weapon, encouraging players to engage in combat. While it does make combat more worthwhile because you're guaranteed to at least get something useful, now nearly every weapon is rusted, which means not only do they break faster, but they do less damage. If you didn't like the weapon breakers before, it's much worse here, because not only are you breaking your weapon, but also whatever you fuse onto it. Well, that's only partially true. Octo Rocks can actually repair your weapon when they suck them in, and even give them a cool bonus effect. That's a nice inclusion. Weapon repairing was something people begged for, but how is anyone supposed to figure this out on their own? Nevertheless, Fuse needed to do more to change combat. The combat in this game is still the same as Breath of the Wild, only your sword has funny hats. Sure, more likely to engage in the combat, but the combat issues are still there, maybe even a bit worse, because Fuse slows down the game a lot. Before, in Breath of the Wild, if my weapon broke, I swapped a new one, and that was it. But in Tears of the Kingdom, I need to select a new weapon, draw the material, and then fuse it if my weapon breaks. We should have been able to fuse materials from the menu. This slows down the game and takes you out of the action for no reason. Aside from your weapons, you can also fuse materials to your shield and arrows. I love how they let you attach with your shield. It was great using a shield laser or a flashlight or a rocket jump, but I rarely use it because my standard weapons do much more damage, and 2, fusing causes the shields to break in like 2 seconds, so why would I ever do it? For arrows, because we can fuse, they completely got rid of arrow types. While I'm not entirely against that idea, they don't pull it off in this game because you must manually fuse every arrow with every material whenever you want an arrow effect. So have fun scrolling through menus for like 30 seconds to try some new stuff. I like some of the new effects, like how key size turn your arrows into homing missiles, or potions that completely blind your enemies. Because I have to manually go through, slowly, every single item and then fuse it, it discourages me from actually using these new effects. Shooting regular arrows is just faster and easier than going through the menu for a slightly better effect. People say Fuse makes you more versatile, but does it? If you need a fire arrow, you attach a fire fuse to your arrow, but we already had fire arrows, they just made you craft it. It just takes extra steps, so it has the illusion of versatility. Also, Fused item looks pretty silly, like, oh, what is this? All in all, Fuse is definitely the ability you'll use most. It encourages and makes us want to fight with monsters more in Breath of the Wild, but once you're in combat, it plays the same as Breath of the Wild, with very minor exceptions, ultimately failing to improve or even alter its predecessor's combat in any substantial way. Back on track, the next rune we got is Ascend. Ascend lets you ascend through any surface, from the bottom to the tippity top. Honestly, it's my favorite here. It's not the flashiest or coolest, but it's just convenient. It's also a small way to combat the rain, so that's always a bonus, and it makes traversing caves way easier. I do have some small nitpicks though. For example, the generic void cutscenes play way too often. It can also be janky sometimes, making you maneuver to the exact perfect spot, but that's pretty rare. Aside from that, I love it. It completely changes how you think of enclosed space in the game. Like Ultra Hand, it's going to be hard to come back to other games without this ability. It's just that useful and convenient. Recall lets you reverse an object movements back in time. Like Ascend, this one's really cool, but it's wildly underutilized. There's so much unique potential for an ability like this, but they barely use it, and when they do, they fall back on reversing gears. Like seriously, how many times will they make us reverse gears? It was cool the first time, guys. It's just getting old now. Also, it completely breaks a lot of the puzzles. For example, you can use Ultra Hand to lift up a platform and then ride it back up with recall. Solve it in your own way, but it just kinda feels cheap. And why can't I reverse enemies, Nintendo? I wanna make columns fall off cliffs. Please, that'd be really funny. The final rune is the only one you don't get on the Great Star Island, and it's auto build. As the name says, the rune lets you automatically build something from components you source or build it with Zonite. Unfortunately, this rune ruins a lot of the game. First, it completely destroys any environmental design. Why would you interact with what the developers cleverly placed in just the right spot to make it a fun little puzzle when you can just spawn a hoverboard and raise right through everything? It completely ruins the game's sense of exploration. In Breath of the Wild, you would always get sidetracked because you're walking 90% of the time. You're exploring and then, oh, what's here? Is that a shrine? This has gotta be a Korok. In Tears of the Kingdom, that sense of exploration is here for much of the early game. But as soon as you get auto build, well... But hey, at least it's convenient. I don't want to spend all that time building. Give me my hard bike right now. This brings me to my biggest issue with the runes. which is that they trivialize much of the game. Ultra Hand ruins the game's sense of exploration. Fuse exists, and then Recall and Ascend breaking many of the game's puzzles, but not in a good, haha, I outsmarted the devs way. No, more in a, wow, they didn't even playtest the game way. And auto build is way too overpowered for how much it costs. But that doesn't take away from the fact that they are still very cool conceptually, and hope they get reintroduced, because in the proper context, they have so much potential. Aside from the regular runes, we have some extra side runes / abilities, like the camera, map, and shrine sensor. The camera is nice. I don't know why the map is a rune. I guess they were desperate to fill out the 6 runes, huh? The shrine sensor is It's really finicky. You have to go in like the precise direction or else it won't work. A problem Breath of the Wild had that Tears of the Kingdom doesn't fix. But Tears does at least add a vertical factor to the shrine sensor, so it's better, if only slightly. Moving on from runes altogether, the stage abilities serve as this game's version of the champion's abilities. Like the Great Sea Island, these feel like neutered down versions of the previous incarnations. For example, instead of Rivali's Gale, we have Vow of Tulin, which summons a gust of wind horizontally rather than vertically. It was definitely the ability I used most in the game. It made platforming and traversal much easier, especially in the early game when you don't have access to OP flying machines. The Rivali's Gale nerf was needed, but it just kind of makes Vow of Tulin feel lame in comparison. It's not original anyway, it's just the nerf weaker version of an old ability, but still, it is very helpful. The one I got next was Yunobo's Vow of Yunobo. This makes Yunobo roll into a ball and destroy stuff. It looks funny, but I mean, it's just not very useful. Sure, he can mine things, but barely, and I can already do that myself without sending all the items flying. I just mainly use it as a guide on all my vehicles. Thirdly, we have Vow of Sidon, which, wow, it's terrible. The only times I ever felt compelled to use it was in his dungeon, and even then, you can just use Splash Fruit. It's not very beneficial. The damage is minimal, and one hit of protection does not matter all that much. It's more of a hassle to run over to Sidon and get the ability than to just keep swinging. Next, there's Vow of Riju, which summons lightning when aiming an arrow. I like how he's using the dungeon, but aside from that, it's just a shock fruit with extra steps. Plus, whenever I want to use her, she's always running away from me or right in the enemy's face, which invalidates the entire point of her ability. The last stage ability is the most disappointing one by far, Vow of Mineru. This ability gives you a drivable mech that you can attach stuff to. The thing is though, it sucks. It does pitiful damage, it's very slow and clunky to control. It lets you go over Gloom and you can attach some stuff for some cool effects. But aside from that, it just clogs your screen like the rest of your abilities. What frustrates me the most is the missed potential. Like, come on, your very own Zelda Gundam, that's so cool, but they completely missed the ball with this one. All of the abilities can be upgraded with the Stage Wheel, a collectible found in the Sky Islands. However, these wheels only upgrade the damage, and these guys barely hit anything. Seriously, these guys will either have Stormtrooper aim, stand there, or actively running away from the action. Why even summon you at this point? Because of that, Stage Wheel are pretty useless despite their initial intrigue. Moreover, all the Sage's abilities have a significant issue, their controls. The Sages are all mapped to the A button, which you use to interact with literally everything in the world. That means you often use their ability when you want to do anything but that. The Sages also tend to clam up together, so when I actually want to use one of their abilities, I usually use the wrong one. I want Yunobo to break rock, not Tulin to set my stuff flying to the void. Aside from Tulin, most of these abilities were worthless. The champion abilities in Breath of the Wild were overpowered, there's no denying that. But did they have to nerf them this hard? But it was a pretty pleasant feeling gathering all the Sages. It was like making a party in RPG, and it was fun having your buddies fighting by our side, taking up on the lone, single bokoblin. In short, Tears of the Kingdom's new abilities are a mixed bag. Ultra Hand is phenomenal, but it feels out of place. It's a fantastic mechanic, but why is it in Zelda? The game barely asks you to use it, so its ingenuity feels wasted here. Why is this complicated, nuts and bolts style of vehicle building in a Zelda game? All the other abilities are pretty cool too, but they either need to be stronger or better utilized. Before the game was released, one of the most significant points of contention was that I would reuse the same map from Breath of the Wild. Many people either didn't like that or were mixed. But personally, I love their reusing the same map. It was an opportunity to see how my favorite world in all of gaming has expanded and grown in the 6 years we haven't seen it. And did they do that? No. Okay, well, kind of. The best changes they made were the small ones that most people wouldn't even see. For example, in Breath of the Wild, at Hateno Village, there's this NPC called Warden. He's an explorer taking a break at the Hateno Village Inn. Surprisingly though, in Tears of the Kingdom, he's still here. You'd think he's an explorer, he would have up and left by now, right? Well no, The thing is, he spent so much time in that inn that now he got married to the innkeeper. That was an excellent little detail that most people won't even know, but still, it makes the world feel so alive. If only the major additions did that. The only significant changes to the map were Lookout Landing, caves, and wells. Lookout Landing is the only new town, and even calling it that is a stretch. It's more of a community center where NPCs go through the game. It was kind of like the round table hold from that one game. What was it called? Golden Swing? Can't remember. And in terms of practicality, you can pray, spend your pose, and buy stuff like the high-end set, so it's a pretty useful location. It even has an underground shelter with a bunch of different NPCs. The shelter even has a cave that connects right to Hyrule Castle, which brings us to the game's other significant addition, caves. There were these little combat encounters with this weird frog, enemies, and some nice loot inside. Sometimes they even had unique stuff like a shrine or a schema stone, but most offered a chest and a bullfrog. So I kept going in another cave, and then another, and then another, and another, because there are 147 of them. I didn't do them all though, I'm not that crazy. The quantity makes them all feel so bland, because you've done it over and over again with minimal variation. Sure, you might get an occasional fire ice cave, but those are exceptions, not a rule. It would have been way cooler if we gone fewer caves, but they were all unique and cool looking. For example, the best cave was Lookout Landing Hyrule Castle Cave. It was huge, it had tons of secrets, it had the knight armor, there was a bunch of branching paths, it had a mini boss for crying out loud. However, it was brought down by something many of these caves have. These stupid rock walls. These things are so annoying. They're everywhere. They take like 5 or more weapons and 20 bombs. They slow the game down for no reason. They're not fun, they're not clever, they're not anything. They're just annoying for the sake of being annoying. I need to get that off my chest. If we'd gone fewer caves, but they were all bigger, more memorable, and uniquely designed, they definitely would have been a highlight of the game. Aside from that one cave though, and a few others, the rest were the same, monotonous thing, over and over again. Maybe doing caves would be tolerable if the loot was good, but that's not true. The most you're gonna get is some loot and bubble gems. Bubble gems can be used to buy rewards from Colton. They're pretty unique stuff like the Marble Mask or the Mystic set. The thing is though, you only need 46 bubble gems. That means as soon as you've done 46 caves, that's it, no more. You don't need to explore any more caves ever again. Now we're gonna talk about wells. We're done talking about wells. What does it just say? You drop in, find some Bright Bloom, like seriously, the only thing in these wells is Bright Bloom, and leave. They're just watered down caves. Hyrule also now has monster camps, and they're okay. They're fun because the combat is generally fun to play with, but aside from that, there's not much to them. They also face the same problem that caves and well have, which is that they're copy and pasted everywhere. Your first monster camp will be the same as your last one, just the enemies scaled up. All these new additions like the caves, well, monster camps, they all feel like a bunch of filler content just stretched throughout the entirety of the map, because that's what it is. Very little makes them special, whether that be unique designs, rewards, bosses, mechanics. Instead, it's just content for the sake of content. Let's get back to that reused map thing. It's not inherently a bad idea, but Tears of the Kingdom does not pull it off. In open world Zelda games, exploration is critical. That sense of wonder, of what's around the corner, is essential to a good experience. While Tears of the Kingdom does have that, especially at the early game before we realize all the caves and wells are the same thing, it's greatly diminished from Breath of the Wild. Whenever I was exploring, I always had that feeling of been there, done that. Or if they did change something in Breath of the Wild, it was just disappointing. Take the Shrine of Resurrection for example. Do you know what's in there now? A cave. Another boring, bland cave, with just some Yiga and a schema stone in it. But aside from that, nothing, just a cave. They could have put some secret hidden dungeon in there, or even just a tiny little Easter egg like a Sheik attack peeking out, but no, more caves. What about the Great Plateau, the starting area of Breath of the Wild, one of the best tutorials in all of gaming? In that time, have people moved in and repaired the Temple of Time? Have they built houses? There's so many wondrous possibilities. Let's see what they did in Tears of the Kingdom. Oh, it's the exact same. There's some chasms. In fact, it got worse because a lot of the Sheik attack is gone. Okay, well, what about Hateno Village? Link and Zelda's home. Surely, they must have made some grand changes to the area. I mean, it's a place of royalty now, right? Nope, it's the exact same place again. The only new thing here are mushrooms and a school. All Zelda really did was add a school, that's it. Hudson's done more to rebuild Hyrule than Zelda, as exemplified through Tarrytown. Tarrytown received some changes, but more was needed. In Breath of the Wild, it was a small knit community that you built from the ground up. Now in Tears of the Kingdom, it's a thriving community hub connected to the base of Akala, but that's about it. It's more than most, but still not substantial enough. Imagine if Tarrytown was now full of giant buildings, like a mini Hyrule New York, where you could see everyone from the entire game just chilling as they moved in and out. Even if there wasn't any reward, it would have still been fantastic to see. But no, instead, we get rails. Well, maybe the towns can't be changed because they're already built. But what about the ruins? They must have been rebuilt or altered in some way, right? Nope. The ruins are still in ruins. You'd think at least Hyrule Castle Town, the literal heart of the kingdom, would have been rebuilt somewhat, but no, it's the exact same. Just without the gardens and the malas. Even some of the minor ruins like Lon Ranch or the Temple of Time, seeing those rebuilt would have contributed to sense that this world is alive and it's changed since we left. That Zelda and the people of Hyrule are trying to fix this world. However, everything is still in ruins, years after the end of Breath of the Wild. What happened to rebuilding Hyrule, Zelda? It's also absolutely bonkers that we can't rebuild Hyrule in the game about building stuff. Why couldn't we visit the ruins and make our own little houses? Maybe you could do a side with Hudson to unlock material, and then you could build your own fully unique buildings, like Minecraft style. Just give us the complete freedom to make whatever we want with these ruins, because obviously the devs or NPCs of this world don't care. Hopefully you now understand that reusing Breath of the Wild's map is not a bad idea. The problem was the way it was executed. Because they added nothing to the map, the game is plagued by a sense of familiarity, which kills the joy of exploration. Instead, replacing the immersive exploration of Breath of the Wild with the more Ubisoft X exploration style. Speaking of Ubisoft X style, the Skyview Towers. They replaced the Sheik Towers from Breath of the Wild, and they did a fine enough job. They have some depth because you don't just go up and grab, you always do a little puzzle involved, whether it be some combat or exploring a cave, making you actually think about how you're going to activate them, which is nice. The cutscenes are also great. I love the music, and Link's expression the first time you use them is hilarious. However, they kill much of the joy found in exploration and getting lost. In Breath of the Wild, you'd always get sidetracked walking from place to place, enabling that game's sense of exploration and discovery. But Skyview Towers launch you miles above even the highest point in Breath of the Wild, which means you're just going to glide over right to destination. No need for sidetracking or exploring, this is Tears of the Kingdom. Tears of the Kingdom also reintroduces stables to unflattering success. They introduced Pony Points, a loyalty program where you earn points for using stable services and get rewards based on how many points you have. The thing is though, the rewards are useless. They revolve around horses, but why would I ever use a horse when I can make my own device that flies at Mach 1? This brings me to traversal. Tears of the Kingdom's traversal is very weird. It peaks in the early game. Walking on foot means you're constantly getting sidetracked and notice all the cool stuff to explore, giving you that same sense of exploration and discovery Breath of the Wild excelled at. Surprisingly, I found myself shield surfing a lot, and Breath of the Wild this ate up your shield's durability, but they reduced it a lot, and for good reason. Shield surfing is fun, and I love how happy Link is when he's doing it. But later on, as you unlock more and more abilities, it becomes trivialized. For example, with the aforementioned Skyview Towers, you go up by 2 of them, fly up, and go direct to your destination. Or pop out a zone of device or make one with Audible and fly everything again. These abilities completely nullify the exploration, making the game incredibly dull as you go direct to your target with no sense of wonder. You could say it's my fault for using that stuff, but why does the game encourage it? Why does it take out time for zonal devices instant? Instead, they should have limited it so we can explore what they put in the game, because there is a lot of content. Sure, a lot of that content feels like padding, bloat, and filler, but there is a lot of content. Lastly, there are the rewards for exploring Hyrule. The most common type of reward are shrines and Koroks. Koroks are a mid-reward. They feel like any generic open-world collectible with little puzzle attached. Still, some of these puzzles can be fun. I like the one where you have to send the plug flying or align it to fit the shape. The worst Korok puzzle though is the one where you take the Korok to his buddy. They're not the worst because of their puzzle design. They can be fun building a zone and device to help the Korok out. They're the worst because of the amount of effort required. The Koroks are often very far away, and the reward does not match the effort. Seriously, only 2 Koroksies? It should be more like 4 or 5. Also,
nighty-nighty. Spaghetti.
With these Koroksies, you can get more inventory slots, which is an okay reward. It's not a necessity, but it can be pretty useful. Shrines are the primary reward for exploring, and they're okay. Shrines are integral to getting stronger, but at a certain point, exploring Hyrule feels lame, because you know your reward will always be either a shrine or a Korok. Interesting rock? Korok. Weird looking mountain? Shrine. This expectedness leads to predictable and repetitive exploration, killing any sense of wonder or discovery. What if instead, there were unique rewards for exploring? What if there was heart and stamina pieces? Collect 4 and you get a new stamina slash heart. Or you could find an item that could fully repair one of your weapons, shields, or bows. Also, we would no longer have to visit a goddess statue or Hetsu. We could upgrade ourselves. These changes would encourage exploration and not just fly everything, because it enhances its flow, increases immersion, makes it more rewarding, less predictable, and more eventful because you have no idea what unique and valuable thing is around the corner or over the mountain. No matter what I say though, there was always a tiny base level of fun when exploring. It's the same Breath of the Wild map, so of course it's fun to run around in. However, they failed to take advantage of the reused map, instead filling it with a bunch of filler content to give the illusion of new stuff, when it's really the old stuff with a bunch of bloat copy and paste all over. The new environments could maybe pick up the slack of the overworld, but unfortunately, they're just as underwhelming. The depths are Tears of the Kingdom's biggest secret. At launch, nobody knew this place existed. It was a complete mystery. So when I first played the game and saw this hole in Hyrule with a bunch of gloom spewing out, I was intrigued. What could be going on there? Then I talked to some people around and they wanted to explore it. You mean I can go in there? So I dived right in, heard those horns, and wow, there's an entire underground down here. Then I saw the map, and it was just as big as Hyrule. Well, they did it. They fixed the issue of reusing the map, is what I thought, until I actually explored the depths, and my disappointment was immeasurable. The biggest problem with the depths is that, ironically, they lack any depth. The same environment stretched out under Hyrule. It's also repetitive, with the same music, enemies, zones, pose, everything. But there is one exception, and that's the Elden Depths. The Elden Depths look unique and play into the fact that it's right underneath a volcano. It was a significant change of pace, and I wish other parts of the depths had taken more inspiration from it. Back to the standard boring depths, at least the atmosphere is excellent. Pure blackness expanding out for what looks like forever. And it's a very eerie tone that subconsciously warns us, hey, this place is dangerous. Helped even better when you throw a bright loom into the abyss and it just falls forever. Plus, realizing the depths is an inversion of Hyrule, where mountains are valleys and vice versa, was a really cool moment. Aside from that, what do you actually get for exploring the depths? Well, you get auto build and zonite. Auto build is super OP and zonite fuels it, so that's a nice reward. You can also find crystallite charges. They help upgrade your battery, but they're a slog to get. You just go around mindlessly killing bosses or opening chests. Not to mention, you then have to take it to another NPC to get it slowly upgraded. In here, they're also pose. They can be exchanged with these giant bargainer statues for some armor and materials. But imagine if instead, we had to fight these bargainer statues as they stomp around, and we used to build a zone base to fight them, like Morgrat, and then we could finally unlock them. Instead, they're just sitting there. You can also find a lot of good items here, which, okay, I like that. It was great to spend time in here and leave fully kitted out with OP weapons and fuse items. It made me feel like I had progressed a lot. There's also the Iga Hiders you can challenge, and they're fun, but there's usually just one soldier in there. The reward is schematics for builds you're never going to use, and take up more resource than the stuff you make on your own. So, aside from the reward issue, exploring this place isn't all that fun. At first, it was cool to explore because you had no idea what was down here, but as soon as you realize it's the same copy and paste environment, a lot of the intrigue is gone. Couldn't they have at least put some secret hidden dungeon down here, or anything except amiibo armor? Like, seriously, why is it down here? Canonically, it makes no sense that Majora's Mask is just chilling in the depths. The reward problem is exacerbated because exploring the depths is so tedious. The overwhelming darkness is so intense that while it does help with the atmosphere, at a certain point, it just becomes annoying. I spend so long hugging or climbing walls, hoping it gets to the other side, only to realize it's blocked off, or I can't get through and have to try again. These giant walls are such a hindrance, they make traversing a chore. Sure, you can get lost in here, but not the fun way Breath of the Wild had, where you're just overjoyed to explore and don't care where you're going, because 1, it's enjoyable, and 2, it's rewarding. The depths have neither of those benefits, so getting lost in here is frustrating except for immersive. On the other hand, as soon as you get auto build or any materials, it becomes super dull, as you just fly freely through the entirety of it. Remember how I said the depths atmosphere subconsciously warned you of its dangers? Well, your subconscious was right, because the depths are perilous. The enemies are super powered up by gloom, and there are tons of mini bosses and camps spread throughout. The danger does make the depths very intimidating, but it comes at a cost. Because of how dangerous the depths were, much of my time was spent near the endgame. At that point, everything was a breeze, which made exploring even more boring. It was just going from light route to light route, occasionally fighting some mobs or mini bosses who would always give me the same, albeit useful reward. The light routes are also directly correlated to a shrine. That meant if I had found a light route but not its corresponding shrine, all fun I had trying to find that shrine just evaporated, because I know exactly where it is. Even the unique-ish stuff is still bland. Like these sand pillars. I have no idea why these were built. Their only purpose you can ascend. It feels very artificial and gamey. This isn't a real world, but a game world built by programmers and developers, not nature. That's technically true, but it feels jarring compared to the natural beauty of the overworld. Or what about the mines? They look pretty cool, I'll give you that. They have such a grand scale with an elegant and sophisticated design. Almost like the Romans, or maybe just the model speaking, I don't know. But there's not much to them, just like one chest and that's it. The design feels wasted, like there should be more, but there's just not. And why is the one under Terry Town? Terrytown was built less than a decade ago, so why does it have a corresponding zone I mine? They could have put something more interesting in here, like maybe a shrine, or NPCs, or bases of the research team, or maybe an ancient race in their town. But no, instead it's just more zone contracts. Or what about the places like the Spring of Hyrule, the Gerudo Bones, the Akala Forest, the Bloopy Burrow, or especially the Lake Hylia Chasm? Okay, let me rant for a bit, because I need to get this off my chest. I was exploring Hyrule and saw Lake Hylia. For some reason, it had its own special chasm, so I thought there must be something cool, right? So I headed over there, dived in, and nothing. All there was a path to a light route, but it was just a normal light route, nothing special about it. It got my hopes up so high for anything special, but no, nothing. I even googled to make sure, but there's nothing in here. It's a complete waste of an opportunity. Where were we? Yeah, the depth's unique parts. They're interestingly designed with many ruins and a very eerie atmosphere, but that's it. It's a cool set piece with nothing to it. Maybe some armor if you're lucky. No quest, no boss, no lore, no NPCs, no towns, no nothing. It all feels so empty and hollow. There should have been more here, but there just isn't. One exception is the Colosseums. While they don't have any of the stuff I said before, they're still pretty fun to take on. It was like a boss rush. They're great, especially the Lionel one. That was one of my favorite parts of the whole game. But unfortunately, most players probably won't experience that. The main story only requires you to go to the depths 3 times. 2 times per dungeon and once for the ending. Aside from that, you never have to go into the depths. This seems pretty weird. You'd think the devs would want you to explore it, but no. The depths are very disconnected from the main game, which is a shame. They had a lot of potential to do exciting and cool quests on here, but instead, it's just 1 giga questline and a bunch of mobs. When people mention that Tears of the Kingdom was finished in 2022 and they spent a year polishing it, I can't help but feel it's a lie, and the depths are a big reason. The depths are obviously inspired by Elden Ring's Underground. Ironic, because Elden Ring was inspired by Breath of the Wild, and now here's Tears of the Kingdom being inspired by Elden Ring. The thing is though, Elden Ring's Underground was unique and varied. It was fun to explore. There was a ton of good rewards and optional quests / bosses. It was like sneaking into a part of the game the devs didn't want you to see. For example, it had the Mimic Tier and Military Dragon Fortress attacks in there. A fantastic item and boss that added so much to the depth of the Underground. There's nothing like that though in Tears of the Kingdom's Underground. The only thing near that level is some mini boss and auto build, but most people will get auto build their first trip to the depths, and the mini bosses are constantly reused, taking away from their impact. In moment to moment gameplay, sure, opening chests, fighting enemies, and discovering light routes can be fun, but that's it, and the novelty wears off fast. As a result, the depths feel like a lazy, hollow, dull, copy and paste environment stretched throughout the underside of Hyrule to give the illusion of new content. The sky is this game's main selling point. It's literally on the front cover, but for being a selling point, it's so underwhelming. The Sky Islands are like an inverse of the depths, where the latter suffer from being too big and boring with nothing to do. The Sky Islands do have content in them, and it's fun, but there's just so little, and that stuff is repeated ad nauseum. We'll get to that later. First, I want to cover their atmosphere and look. The Sky Islands have a fantastic vibe. It replicates that lonely yet calm feeling Breath of the Wild oozed, with their yellows serving as a neat contrast to the greens of Hyrule. The sky also looks beautiful, which makes exploring them such a treat. The rays of the sun illuminating the isles. A lot of time, I drop the controller and just look around, especially during sunsets or sunrises. The early game was with the skies at its best. Using all of your abilities and the Zonai devices laid out for you by the game while combating the Zonai constructs was invigorating. Enough good vibes though. Let's get the cat out of the bag, which is the fact the sky covers like 10% of Hyrule at max, which is pathetic for being the game's main selling point. Imagine if in Mario Odyssey, you only use Cappy for 10% of the game, and all the best Cappy moments were front-loaded right at the start. The rest of the captures just being the exact same, copy and pasted frog captures, with an occasional Goomba capture if you beg. The game would still be amazing, but a core feature that pushes it over the edge would be missing. That's what's happening here. Tears of the Kingdom is still a great game, but a core part that should be there just isn't. The Great Sky Island is easily the biggest and most expansive Sky Island. Despite what I said at the start, it is still very well designed and has a lot of stuff to do. However, that means everything else in the entirety of the sky is a disappointment in comparison. You already experienced the best, so the rest are just cheap lowlights in comparison. Okay, so what actually is there in the sky? Aside from the dungeon and the Great Sky Island, there are 6 types of Sky Islands, which include Shrine/Gacha Sky Islands, Oasis Sky Islands, Sphere Puzzle Sky Islands, the Labyrinths, Boss Sky Islands, and Skydive Sky Islands. The Shrine/Gacha Islands are probably the most common type. We'll talk about the Shrine in its own section, but there's more to it than that. they have these Zonite gotcha devices, where you exchange Zonite charges for Zonite devices. They're good for getting parts, and it's always fun to check what they have the first time around. Link is canonically a gambler, but subsequent visits feel annoying watching this cutscene, and then praying at the part I want. They also usually have this launcher on them, which... However, they're so drab because they're the most common type of island. They have no life or intrigue, they're just shrine and gotcha devices, repeated over and over and over again. They don't feel like a real place built from the ground, they feel like an island made by game devs to put shrine and gotcha devices on them. Oasis Islands are the most chill of all of them. They don't have any puzzle elements in them, like shrines or Koroks. Instead, they're more of a place to relax and gather materials, like fairies and fish. I like these guys. They're a nice little break from the typical Sky content and have a very calm atmosphere. Sphere puzzle islands are pretty cool. Some of them are lame where you just spin around and shoot the green rock, or head right in, but others like the mirror one are awesome. If there's anything I love in Zelda, it's mirror/light puzzle, so this place was peak for me. It gave me massive classic Zelda vibes, like it could have been ripped right out of Wind Waker or Ocarina of Time. The labyrinths are pretty bad. The ground section sucks. It's the same maze from Breath of the Wild, so I knew exactly where to go, and even if I didn't, they put a bunch of acorns guiding the path, which defeats the whole point of a maze. The exception is the Akala one, which is quite different. There's actually a really good cave to get there, with the mini-boss and everything, but most players are just going to glide right over it. It's what you did in the last game, so most players aren't even going to engage with this decent new little bit of content. The labyrinth itself is also all flooded now, which makes traversing the place so annoying. Swimming is extremely slow. It still has the acorns, but at least it's different from the other mazes, whose ground part is practically identical from Breath of the Wild. The sky section of the labyrinth is better, but barely. You start by activating this terminal, then you have to find 4 more terminals scattered throughout the labyrinth. You can get lost in here, but as soon as you go up or look at your map, all the challenge disappears. From there, it's just tedium going to the terminals and activating them. There's no threat or puzzle, it's just gliding over there until you do it. Once you activate the 4 terminals, you dive from the top of Hyrule to its lowest depths, which, yeah, that was a really cool moment. Once you're down there, you fight a flux construct. You then need to head over to one final terminal, where you learn more about the evil origin of the armor. Cool. I get it the first time. You didn't need to tell me 3 times through every labyrinth how much this armor loves to kill babies. Speaking of the armor, it's poo-poo. It looks fantastic, but I can't even upgrade it, so I'm never gonna use it. Yippee! I like the presentation of the labyrinth, these giant cubes, and the skydive was cool, but the content itself is so meh. Boss islands are a mixed bag. They're just a giant circle, and they're so far away. Some of them take upwards of 10 minutes to get there. Once you're there though, it's fun. They're always either a Gliok or a Flux construct, and while they're used way too much, at their core, they are fun to fight. Skydive islands are pretty good. They're a great showcase of the new skydive mechanic, and the armor is nice. But once you do it, that's it. You can return to beat your record, but there's no reward. They feel wasted having just one minigame for how big they are. There were also some other miscellaneous sky islands, like the Zonite Forge Island or Lightcast Island. The Forge was pretty big, and the diving section felt ripped right out of Mission Impossible. Lightcast had light puzzles, which means, of course, it's automatically good. We needed more of these big sky islands that are visually unique and mechanically distinctive. And yeah, that's it. That's basically all the Sky Island variety in the entire game. Just those islands, sparsely populating the entirety of Hyrule's atmosphere. On paper, they're alright. I like a few of them, but there's so few. If you're lucky, you might get 1, maybe 2 in a region of the good ones. Aside from that, it's these plush-shaped islands with nothing on them, or the shrine/gotcha ones, copy and pasted throughout. Fighting a Flux Contract/Gliok or discovering an oasis was cool the first time. The 10th time is just tiresome. The issue is exacerbated by the number of islands. It's not like the caves, which, while they're all the same, at least there's a lot. The Sky Islands are the worst of both worlds. They're very little and they're all alike. The fun you had exploring gets washed out at a certain point because they're too small, too few, and too repetitive. In terms of visuals, while they look amazing, they all look the same. The Sky Islands in Elden look the same as the ones in Farosh, which look the same as the ones in Hebrew. Why couldn't they spice it up with some varying island environments, like fire or snow islands? They used to be part of Hyrule, so it's not like it wouldn't make sense. What if they had ancient ruins of the Zonai or ancient people of Hyrule? Or maybe recently people have built bases and camps there? You're telling me no one, not the Rito, the Zonai research team, just random people, haven't gone up there and explored? Really? The islands are also just not that rewarding. Aside from shrines, you only get some armor and stage wheel, which we've already covered before how useful they are. The islands fall into the same trap the rest of the game falls into, which is to say, it's very monotonous. If there were tons of Sky Islands, maybe it'd be a bit more acceptable, or even if we got fewer islands but they all felt unique and fully developed. Instead, the repetitive stands out even more because of their quantity. Even the enjoyment that came from traversing the skies goes straight out the window when you get some zoning devices or olive oil, because you just fly through everything. For example, before I knew about the hoverbike, it was a complete mystery as to how I got on this boss island, or the light dragon. Maybe I need to use a skydive tower and land precisely on the right island to get an even better vantage point than with a Zona device. But now, on any playthrough I will ever do, it's just gonna be... This hoverbike could honestly have its own section for how much it ruins the game. It seems like the islands were going to be a lot more expansive at one point, because in an interview with the game's director, Hidemura Fubayashi, he said that during development, they made so many Skylands, testing out a bunch of different gameplay elements, to the point that designers had to step in and tone it down. I'm not a game dev, so I'm really just speaking out of my ass here, but I feel like they went a bit too far in the other direction and took too many of the Skylands out, which is really a bummer, because Tears of the Kingdom with the fully developed sky would have been a much better game. Overall, the Sky Islands feel unfinished, or like they were tacked on at the end of development for marketing purposes. But that's weird, like, the Sky Islands were obviously where the game all started out, right? In the end though, what we're left with is islands that have so much potential, but are simply too repetitive and disenchanting. .3D Zelda, starting with Ocarina of Time, was the birthground of combat for nearly every action-adventure game you've ever played. From Skyrim to Assassin's Creed to Elden Ring, its roots can all be traced back to that one game on the N64. Unfortunately, Zelda's combat hasn't changed much from that one game in 1998, but it is still fun. I like the combat here, even if it's basically the same as Breath of the Wild. Swinging swords, shooting arrows, making explosions, sending guys in fire, it's all very entertaining. It does feel too similar to Breath of the Wild, but that's another issue entirely. However, the combat still has many issues. Most of them root back to Breath of the Wild, and Tears of the Kingdom still hasn't fixed them. The biggest issue with combat is the stakes, or lack thereof. In any fight, no matter what, as soon as you get low in health, pop into your menu and eat 5 full course meals. The accessibility and ease of meals made any fight trivial. Even if a fight is hard, which most aren't, the food completely negates any challenge the duel could pose. In combat, you also have so many overpowered options. Bullet time was broken, just letting you line up a ton of easy headshots for ridiculous amounts of damage. It's even worse in Tears of the Kingdom, because you not only lose stamina when you shoot an arrow, not when you're in bullet time. Charge attacks let you easily stun many enemies, and of course, flurry rushing. While it is super satisfying to pull off, it's way too easy. Sometimes you get it before the enemy swings, or even after he's done swinging. The opening is too broad. Even if you miss it, and that's fine, you're always guarding when you're going to flare rush, so if you failed, there's no risk. Your shield took the hit for you. In good combat design, the high damage option comes with many risks. Usually that entails you receiving damage. But in Tears of the Kingdom, the high damage option is the high defense option, and it's high reward and low risk. This brings me to parrying. Specifically, why would you ever parry? Parry gives you an opening, but not only is it very brief, it's also much harder to execute and comes with more risk. Before, you could parry to send back attacks like Guardian's Laser Beam, but here, you can't even parry most attacks, and the ones you can do barely any damage. So how would you fix these problems? Well, thank you for asking, dear viewer, for giving me a clean segue right into Luis Fixes Tears of the Kingdom / Breath of the Wild's combat. Alright, the first significant change we're going to make is, food, that entire part of the menu, is gone now. Instead, if you want effects like cold resistance or stamina, you gotta cook elixirs. Right off the bat, that one change fixes OP healing and makes elixirs more worthwhile, because when was the last time you used elixirs? Okay, but how are we gonna heal? Well, Estus flasks from Training Ring? I know they're not called Estus flasks, but I'm not calling them flasks of Crimson Tear. We're just gonna take that entire system and put it into the kingdom. All of it. The flasks, the golden balls, and the sacred tears. Of course, they wouldn't be called that, they'd be called something like Triforce Use or something like Zeltic can name them. I'm just here to figure out how it works. The golden balls and sacred tears items would be spread all over the map. Of course, they would increase the amount of flasks you have and how much they heal. This would incentivize players to actually explore, because who doesn't want more healing, especially now since it's much more limited. The flask will be refreshed every time you sleep or complete a shrine. Basically, your flask refills whenever you get healed in the game. That fix also comes with an extra bonus of making you want to sleep in inns and stables, because can you remember the last time you slept in an inn? To use them, you'll press down on the D-pad and drink it in real time. Whistling can be mapped somewhere else. Okay, fix the healing, but what about the actual combat? Firstly, no more shields when flare rushing. This makes trying to flare rush an actual high risk, high reward option. Secondly, The opening for parrying will be much wider, and it's going to send back the majority of projectiles, from arrows to Lionel Fire Blast. They're going to go right back to center. Parry projectiles will do 2 times the damage, to encourage more parrying. Now, Flurry Rushing is an actual high-risk, high-reward option, and parrying will provide that sense of mastery over the game it had with Guardians, but now to every enemy if you're good enough. While it isn't perfect, and I'm no game dev, I think this system would do pretty well, and make combat much more engaging than it currently is. Thanks for coming to my tech talk. Zelda team did make some of their own shakeups through brand new enemies. The enemy variety was a big complaint for Breath of the Wild, because 90% of the time you're fighting the same Bokoblins, Moblins, and Lizalfos. Well, in Tears of the Kingdom, 90% of the time you're fighting the same Bokoblins, Moblins, and Lizalfos. To their credit, they did introduce new enemies, so let's go over them. The list includes the following: Soldier Constructs, Captain Constructs, Gibdos, Likes, Evermeans, Aracudas, Horriblins, and Little Frogs as base enemies, with Boss Bokoblins, Flux Constructs, Frogs, Gleeoks, and Phantom Ganon / Gloomhand as our new mini-bosses. It's nice they added more, but the amount still needs to be improved. Look at some of this concept art for Guardians from Breath of the Wild. Terrifying, right? Well, you know where they would fit right in? The depths. Or go online, you'll find many original, unique, and exciting fan-made enemy designs. Tears of the Kingdom had so much potential to introduce a bunch of new enemies, and they should have. The enemy variety is still very much lacking. It's among the lowest in the entire series. But it's not just about how many enemies there are, it's about how they're used. Moblins, Bokoblins, and Lizalfos would be more tolerable if they were unique depending on its region. Maybe the ones in Eldin wore fire armor, the ones in Lanayru knew how to swim or wear scuba gear, or the ones in Hebra had wingsuits that's cozy sweaters. At least then it would spice them up and make each area feel more distinct combat-wise. But no, the enemies in Necluda are the same as the ones in Gerudo. They're also paced poorly. They throw around the enemies haphazardly, and don't say in some new unique enemies for the late game. Your late game enemies are your early game enemies, just paint a different color. It makes the endgame way less engaging because you're fighting the same guys you fought the entire game. Aside from the variety issue, many of the new enemies are more annoying than actual enemies. Visually though, they all look great. Just like Breath of the Wild, each of these enemies is incredibly expressive and has a fantastic design. Let's run through them and show you what I mean. Evermeans. These were pretty scary the first time a tree jumped down and started attacking me, but after that, they lost all sense of shock because I began to expect them, not helped by how weak they are. Aracudas. Like Evermeans, my first interaction with them was great. Coming down from the Great Sky Island, landing in the water, only to see something in the distance. Is that a Bokoblin flying? I got closer to investigate and realized it was a Bokoblin being carried by this skinned bat-looking thing. Then it started chasing me down, and the fight was on. It was only on for a second though, because the Aracudas died in one shot. Again, making them feel more like a gimmick than an actual enemy, and losing any sense of intrigue or danger afterward. Legs. These things are creepy, and I like how they take your weapon. On my first playthrough, I was livid that this thing just took away my best sword, but then I killed it and it was back. Which kinda took away from the impact of the moment, but still, don't make them take my weapons. Please, don't do that. Legs are simply too weak. Their attacks are simple to avoid, and they love flaunting their giant weak point. Once you hit them with a single arrow, you mash the Y button until they're dead. They don't scale either, so they're not worth fighting. But what about the chest drop? Oh, you mean the chest that never has anything good in it? Little Frogs. What can I say about Little Frogs? They die in one hit and give you Zonite. I like the sounds they make and how they foreshadow real Frogs, but aside from that, they're an absolutely nothing enemy. What's worse is that they're the only unique enemy you'll find in the entire depths. Yeah, that's it. This guy. Horriblins. These guys feel the most like an actual enemy. They love to climb walls like a spider and laugh at you. I like these touches, it gives them a very distinct personality. Mechanically though, they're another use an arrow and mash the Y button. Moreover, they're only found in caves, so they don't help much with the enemy variety problem. I've saved the best for last though. Soldier Construct and Captain Constructs are great base enemies. They're this game's version of the Sheikah Scouts from Breath of the Wild, except Zonai. The Soldier Constructs are alright. They feel like a Bokoblin except smarter and green. Captain Constructs on the other hand are great. They're strong, big, and powerful. They even use fuse to attach flamethrowers and beams to their weapons. They're always a pickle to fight because going up close can be really dangerous, but they're not just going to let you wail on them with a bow. They're going to fight back. Tears of the Kingdom's mini-bosses are just as much of a mixed bag. Gloomhands are this game's scariest enemy. They're obviously trying to be Tears of the Kingdom's version of Guardians, and by that, I mean an enemy whose sole purpose is to give you PTSD, but they fall short in nearly every way compared to Guardians. The best thing about Guardians is that they strike that perfect middle ground of difficulty. They do tons of damage, and in the early game, an encounter with them is basically a death sentence. However, even in the early game, they were always beatable. Right from the second you got off the Great Plateau, you can run straight to Hyrule Field and kill a Guardian. All you had to do was master parrying, and these guys were yours. which made mastering that skill so satisfying after these guys terrorize you the entire game. Even if you didn't master parrying, at a certain point, you get strong enough to waltz right to it and slash every one of its limbs off without a sweat. But Gloom Hands, they don't have that sweet spot of difficulty. They're either way too easy or way too hard. They're too easy because there's so many ways to cheese them. Go in the water, go on a tree, go 3 inches up a wall, or just run. Once you do that, spam bomb arrows and you won. Good luck trying to cheese a guardian like that. On the other hand, they're too hard because if you get caught, it's over. As soon as they grab you, they're just gonna wail on you and beat you until you're dead, with no chance of you fighting back. This leads to any encounter with Gloom Hands either being a snooze fest or an unfair, frustrating experience. They have some good parts though, like the eerie music, their atmosphere, their design, and my first encounter with them, which was absolutely terrifying. These horrific looking hands just popped out of nowhere while screaming and chasing after me. Then they got a hold of me and crushed me to death. It was horrifying, but in a perfect way. Once you defeat the Gloom Hands, Phantom Ganon appears. Ignoring that he undermines and spoils the final boss's moveset, they're excellent. They lean into what makes Wild Era Zelda combat good, learning an enemy's moveset and mastering the flurry rush timing, utilizing all of your abilities to get your advantage, thinking of creative and unique ways to beat them. Enemies like them and Lionel's embrace that, making them so fun to fight. Moving on from that 2-in-1 package, Gleeok are this game's other stand-up mini-boss. They're sort of like this game version of Lionel's. I actually like these guys. Not only do they have a really cool design, but they're just fun to fight. They're a good mixture of classic Zelda puzzle boss and just straight up combat boss like a Lionel. They were also a massive threat in the early game, so finally being strong enough to fight one gave an incredible sense of progression. Battle Taluses are just stone taluses with 3 bokoblins. Boss bokoblins are literally just bokoblins, but big. Flux constructs are very good. I love how they make you use every one of your abilities and have to think about how to beat them. The only problem is that they're copy and pasted everywhere, to the skies and the depths, so fighting them gets very old very fast. Frogs. These guys are pretty weird. The first encounter though was great, traveling through the depths and then suddenly this thing charges you out of nowhere trying to suck you in. Although they have very little originality. They're like an assortment of other mini bosses, like a Hinox, a Stone Talus, and a Dongo, all coated in a blue-green frog aesthetic. The best way to beat them is to feed them bombs, distract them with Blight Boom, or hit them in the eye. Once you do that, it's time to mash that Y button. They're a neat little boss, but they're too easy, but okay overall. The reward is helpful though, because it can be used to upgrade the depth set, which brings us to our next point, armor. Armor in Tears of the Kingdom is a mixed bag. The armor system in this game is basically the same as one in Breath of the Wild. They did introduce some new sets like the Awakening set or the Elemental Attack sets. Unfortunately though, most of them are too weak, or the set bonus isn't worth it. Once you find a set you like, you're probably never going to take that off again. The game gives very little reason for you to mess around or try new armor, which is a problem Breath of the Wild had that Tears of the Kingdom doesn't fix. Tears also doesn't fix the fact you can't see the upgrades for armor in the inventory, and you can't just click equip set. I don't know why this isn't in the game. So many people complain about that in Breath of the Wild. It's just a mindless, annoying hindrance. The same applies to the upgrading system. It's such a slog to find all the upgrading materials, especially for the better sets. I really wanted to use the Fierce Deity set and the Champion Leather. 1, because they're really good, and 2, because they look really cool. So that meant I had to get all 4 dragon parts for all 4 dragons. Not only did I have to find them, which was a hassle in and of itself, then, once I'm on the dragon, I had to sit there waiting 10 minutes for each part. Let's do some quick math. The first dragon part was free, so it means no waiting. Then I had to wait 10 minutes 3 times for the other parts. That meant I waited 30 minutes for 1 dragon. Multiplying that 30 minutes by 4 dragons meant at least 2 hours of my playthrough, which meant just sitting there, waiting for the dragons to glow. That doesn't even account for pausing the game or any interruptions. That's unacceptable. This is this game's love for wasting time and filler at its finest. And it only took me 2 hours because I duplicated the items. If I didn't, then only God knows how long it would have taken. Before we end with armor, I have some nitpicks. Alright, the first one, why doesn't the Hylian hood, the Champion's leather, and the Hylian pants have a set bonus? They're obviously meant to be a set, even the game's marketing agrees with me, so why isn't there a set bonus? You can customize your armor, which is nice for expression, but if you ever want to make any changes, you gotta go back to Ateno, talk to this guy, pay up, and watch the cutscene. The same applies to the Hylian hood. Why do we need to talk to Saci? Taking off the hood should be an out-of-the-box feature. And why can't the coolest armor be upgraded? If it was up to me, I'll spend the whole game wearing Phantom Ganon, but I can't upgrade it, so it's gonna sit in my inventory collecting dust. Speaking of collecting dust, the runes. In Breath of the Wild, the runes were very helpful in combat, especially stasis. Freezing enemies in place was so cool, but in Tears of the Kingdom, the runes barely get used. Fuse is important to combat, but it gets used before the fight, not actually in the fight, and it doesn't change much about the actual fighting itself. Ultra Hand can be used to create these elaborate death machines, but why would it ever do that? It takes a lot of time, brain power, and resources when I could just go in, swinging like usual. Plus, at that point, I'm not engaging in combat, I'm just building robots to do it for me, which can be fun in its own unique way, but doesn't fix the combat. At least Tears of the Kingdom has many of the good parts of Breath of the Wild's combat, such as the freedom and player choice, and nearly every encounter you can go in guns blazing, sneak around, or snipe from afar. While Breath of the Wild is one who introduced all this, Tears of the Kingdom at least adds some sprinkles to the system. The last thing left to cover regarding combat is the scaling. There are 3 types of scaling to cover: armor scaling, weapon scaling, and enemy scaling. Let's do weapons first, because it's the least problematic. The weapon scaling is good. For most of the game, you'll never be too overpowered or weak. As long as you use the game systems, you'll be strong enough. But the weapons in the chest should scale, or at least more than they do now. I'm pretty sure they do, but it's so slow that most of the chests you open are going to be completely useless. You do reach a certain point where you become so strong that nothing can stand in your way, but it's very late in the game, so it won't intrude on regular play, and it's very satisfying. You've put in tons of effort and time, so your reward is stomping on everything. It's good. Next is enemy scaling, which is ingenious. Enemy scaling in open world games takes a lot of work. If you don't scale, you risk players going into an area overpowered, making everything a snooze fest, or the inverse, where players go into an area too weak and get unfairly squashed. But if you do scale, it can make the world seem very artificial and gamey, not giving you the sense of satisfaction and progression. Tears of the Kingdom addresses this issue in such a subtle yet perfect way. All they do is scale one single enemy. That's it. It's the best of both worlds. Get a sense of progression and power coming back to early areas and destroying the mobs, while also being served a bit of a challenge and an actual incentive for combat. Finally, there's armor scaling, which out of the 3, Tears of the Kingdom does the worst. The issue with the armor scaling is that it's too extreme. For a lot of the early game, when your armor is weak, everything will one-shot you. However, as soon as you upgrade your armor even a bit, you suddenly become an indestructible tank that no one can touch. The armor scaling is too drastic. That sweet spot of not too much damage lasts for a very short amount of time. It doesn't gradually scale, but instead it works more so in increments. I don't know why they don't just scale the armor like they scale everything else. It leaves combat feeling either frustratingly unfair or laughably easy with just a bit of upgrading. Overall, Tears of the Kingdom's combat is basically the same as Breath of the Wild. As a sequel, it failed to reinvigorate its predecessor's combat, ultimately leaving it feel very bland and stale because we've been doing this for over 7 years. But it does introduce some very novel concepts to play around with, which, while they lack the incentive or are too clunky, can be very fun if you do use them. From the very first moment we laid our eyes on Tears of the Kingdom in 2019 with that teaser trailer, back when it was only known as the sequel to Breath of the Wild, the story already had massive expectations. How could it not? Link and Zelda together, there's a bunch of creepy imagery, and of course, the return of Ganondorf. And then a few months later, Eiji Aonuma claimed the story would be dark like Majora's Mask. How could people not be hyped? Alas, when the game came out 4 years later, what we got was very different. This game's story is unlike many of its other aspects, which is to say, no one defends it. It's almost unanimous that Tears of the Kingdom dropped the ball in terms of its narrative. The biggest issue with the story is its presentation. The game's story is mainly told with these tears, found in these giant drawings called geoglyphs that give you flashbacks to the past. It's the same format as Breath of the Wild, and it works in that game, so why doesn't it work here? Well, it's because in Breath of the Wild, each memory is its own isolated event. We already know everyone is going to die, so they only serve to flesh out the characters. It's up to you whether it did that effectively, but at least it made sense as to why the story was told that way. In Tears of the Kingdom though, the memories have a specific order that play off one another. Events build on top of one another, like a normal narrative. They definitely tried more with the story, but the format kills a lot of the work they put in. Firstly, you can find the memories in any order. That means, undoubtedly, people will be spoiled and get them out of order. It's like trying to watch a movie, but you put all the scenes on shuffle. It just doesn't work. For example, on my first playthrough, I was making my way to Rito Village, and I saw a geoglyph, so I went over and found the memory. And oh, the first shot is Queen Sonia dead on the floor, instantly ruining any suspense or shock I could have gotten from this moment. And why wouldn't I look at the memory? It feels very unnatural to see this memory and then hold off like, no, I'm not gonna do it. I gotta watch them out of order. And even if you do know the order, which most players won't because it's very hard to decipher that this specific room is trying to tell you to watch in a very specific order, so most people are just gonna watch it when they find the memory, giving them this very out of whack experience. If they wanted to keep the memory format, which is just a fundamentally bad idea for the type of story they want to tell, why couldn't they at least put this specific flashback anywhere else? The thing is though, there's such an easy solution to the memory problem. Just have the stories play in order whenever you find them. Story will still have problems, but at least now, it'll be an actual linear story instead of the fragmented jigsaw puzzle we got. Finding them could be more fun too. Unlike Breath of the Wild, where they precisely pinpoint where the memory was, actually getting you to explore and familiarize yourself with the map, Tears of the Kingdom makes you run around these giant drawings till you finally find them. Sure, they're easy to find, but they don't have that aha moment Breath of the Wild memories had. The geoglyphs also don't make any sense either. According to Impa, they just appeared out of nowhere. Really? And what do the drawings mean? They imply that the people saw what the memories are, but how? Aside from presentation, the story itself could be a lot better. If you've never played Tears of the Kingdom or need a refresher, I'll do a quick summary. Here's a timestamp to skip the summary if you don't need it. The game starts with Link and Zelda finding Mummy Ganon. Zelda and the Master Sword sent to the past, and Ganon mortally wounds Link, promptly being saved by Rauru, who takes him to the Great Sky Island to be healed. In the past, Zelda wakes up in a field, where Rauru and Sonia are taking a walk. Zelda realizes she's in the past, and the King and Queen basically adopt Zelda, so they can help her out with their time travel shenanigans. That is, until Ganondorf kills Sonia, takes her Secret Stone, and becomes the Demon King. Rauru and the sages team up to kill Ganondorf, but they fail. Instead, Rauru sacrifices to steal Ganondorf away. To get the Master Sword to full health, Zelda eats her Secret Stone, thus becoming an immortal dragon, roaming the sky for eons, bathed in the sword in her sacred light to repair it against the rematch with Ganondorf. In the present, Link wakes up, gets his runes, and lands on Hyrule. From there, Purik gives him the directions for the regional phenomena, and he's off. He gets all the memories, frees each region, defeats the boss, and the sages get their Secret Stone. He pulls out the Master Sword from the Light Dragon and storms Hyrule Castle. There, with the help of the sages, they fight on into the depths of Hyrule Castle. I glossed over some details and there is more to cover, but that's the general plot. Now that we're all caught up, let me cover the good parts and then the negatives first. The first cutscene is amazing. It's creepy, it's dark, and full of tension. I love it. The cutscene where Zelda becomes Light Dragon is perfect. The music, the performance, the emotions, the visuals, it's all perfect. Legitimately 10 out of 10, one of the best scenes in all of Zelda history. The narrative has themes like sacrifice and community. These themes, especially the latter, are done pretty well. It's never directly said to you, but shown, like how the sages rescue you when you need them most, or how you work with the Hyrule Defense Force to restore Hyrule. It also serves as a juxtaposition to Breath of the Wild, which is a theme focusing more on isolation and serenity. Ganondorf and Rauru are badasses. Even if that's more their design and powers carrying them than their actual writing, I'll take what I can get. They also have the best performance out of the entire cast, so you two get a gold star. The cutscenes are phenomenally animated. The story can actually be pretty enjoyable if you just turn your brain off and look at the fantastic visuals. For the negatives, we have a lot to unpack. For example, the game tries to have a central mystery. Where is Zelda and what's she doing? Unfortunately, that mystery is solved in less than 3 hours into the 60-hour game. We see from the very first memory cutscene she's in the past, so why does this game keep playing up as a mystery? Still, many main and side quests involve people seeing Zelda and wondering what she's doing, but we know what she's doing, she's in the past. The problem worsens when you finally see all the cutscenes and realize she's a Light Dragon, or even before that, because there are many ways to spoil it for yourself or just find out. It makes the quest even more annoying because you know beyond a shadow of a doubt that's not Zelda. All we need is one line of dialogue with the sages that could be something like, "Hey, we know you're not the real Zelda, come back here," and the events could play out the exact same way. But even still, the game keeps going, "Oh, where's Zelda? Why is she doing this really bad stuff?" It feels like an insult to our intelligence, like the game thinks we're stupid. I know this game's made for kids, but come on, they're not that dumb. Another massive problem rears its ugly head in the first cutscene, and it's right here. The problem is twofold. One, why couldn't we go back in the past? It's the same thing with Breath of the Wild. All the cool stuff has already happened, but at least before, they made that choice, so it makes sense as to why Link spent hundreds of hours exploring Hyrule. Zelda's in a stalemate, and Link needs to find the Master Sword, so he can take his time. Here, Link should be in a frantic hurry, desperately trying to find Zelda and stop Ganondorf. Instead, the game should have taken place in the past. Imagine how much better that would have been. We would have been able to interact with Zelda and learn more about the Zonai, form bonds and connections with Rauru, Sonia, Minoru, the sages, or even new characters, explore ancient Hyrule, and of course, actually develop a rivalry with Ganondorf. Instead, we get told the cool stuff through mediocre memories again. The second problem with this moment is that Zelda is taken back in time. This game was an opportunity to finally give Zelda some agency, but no, send her back in time. It doesn't make sense either because Minoru says,
"Ultimately, the Secret Stone only amplifies your power. it doesn't suddenly grant you mastery and control. That's still up to you.
So how did Zelda time travel? Well, she's here, and just so happened to arrive at the exact spot where Robert and Sonya were walking, because of course. But it's not like the story even used her well in the past. In fact, she's worse here than in Breath of the Wild. In Breath of the Wild, she was an actual character with, motivations, personality, conflict, and development. Zelda was a young woman trying to figure out how to help. She had interests like technology, which was kind of her whole thing. She was basically a nerd. It isn't Breaking Bad, but at least it's something. More than other Zeldas who were just a damsel in distress. But here, for the vast majority of cutscenes, she's just standing there, not doing anything but talking about Link. She should be fawning and completely nerding out over all the Zonite tech. You remember how she was with the Sheikah tech? Why isn't she like that with the Zonite tech? Her relationship with Rauru and Sonya are also sorely lacking. The most we get is one scene where they're having tea, but it was pretty pointless. The scene focused more on Link than the actual characters in the memory. This memory should have either been completely cut out or changed to focus more on the actual characters in the memory. This squandered this perfect opportunity to create a bond between Zelda, Rauru, and Sonya, but no. They use it instead to tell us stuff we already know or that doesn't matter because it never gets paid off. Zelda also doesn't change. She's the same character from the start of the game as she is from the end of the game. Sure, she underwent a massive physical transformation, but she would have made that choice even at the start of the game. She didn't learn something that made her make that choice. She would have always made that choice. Zelda's tragedy also isn't fully realized. Rauru and Sonya are basically the only family she has left. Everyone she ever loved, all her friends, family, and most of her subjects died 100 years ago at the hands of Calamity Ganon. Rauru and Sonya should be like her surrogate parents, Zelda, because that's literally what they are. But if that's true, where is Rauru and Sonya's offspring? How does their bloodline pass on? That would add a lot to the tragedy of Zelda's character. She lost 2 sets of parents, but we don't even feel the impact of that because why should we? These characters aren't developed. They just stand there and give exposition, and occasionally you might get some action. Speaking of just standing there, Zelda saw Ganondorf going back in time, and maybe she didn't know who it was, but couldn't she at least tell Rauru something like, hey, I saw this creepy corpse that knew me and Link's name, and it also had your arm in it. At least then it could have prepared them a bit better. But no, she tells Rauru that after Ganon's killed Sonya and become the Demon King. Even if Rauru didn't believe her, she took photos of murals depicting someone who looked a lot like Rauru fighting someone who looked a lot like Ganondorf. Not to mention, she fought a beast called Calamity Ganon for over 100 years, and you're telling me you don't know why Ganondorf is suspicious? As far as I see it, all the death and destruction that's happened is Zelda's fault. And no Zelda though. What about the game's big bad, Ganondorf? Back in Breath of the Wild we had Calamity Ganon, who wasn't really a character. He was more like a force of nature, like an evil tornado. He had no real goals or ambitions and just served as a scary punching bag for the heroes, which worked fine enough for what the story was going for. However, Tears of the Kingdom was going for a more traditional narrative with a traditional villain, and after 17 years, we finally got the return of Ganondorf Dragmire. Sort of. You see, every other time we've seen Ganondorf, it's been the same guy, the same man from Ocarina of Time, just in a different timeline. So when Ganondorf first recognized Link and Zelda, it was like, oh man, this is the same guy. He's back and remembers us. But no, it was just because he met Zelda in the past, and Rauru, seconds before death, was like, Link's gonna mess you up. Okay, fine then. He's a new Ganondorf, whatever. He's Demise Spirit reincarnated, I guess, whatever. He still has a lot of other problems. As a Ganondorf, he comes with lofty expectations. Expectations to be, well written. But he's not. He's not Ganondorf, he's video game bad guy number 27. Look at some of these quotes.
Hyrule will bow down before me. I will crush any opposition. I will rule. That is what a king must do. You tried to control me, Rauru, and you will die knowing that you failed!
This isn't Ganondorf. There's nothing in here about the Triforce, his relationship to Link, his relationship with Zelda, the other Gerudos, nothing. You could copy and paste these lines into any bland villain, which would work just as well. He also doesn't have a character either. He's just evil because he's evil, with his only motivation being the vaguest bad guy motivation of, I will be king. He doesn't even adhere to that though. If he wants to be king so bad, why does he spend the whole game sitting down in Hyrule Castle? Why didn't he get up and, start ruling? That's the only characterization we ever get for him, and he doesn't even stick to that. Furthermore, he's pretty stupid. Apparently he caused the regional phenomena to prevent Link and the sages from finding the secret stones, and to hurt the region's people. But if you wanted to kill the Rito, Gerudo, Goron, and Zora, why not just kill them? Send your forces in an all-out assault to kill all of them, instead of just causing them slight annoyances. If you had done that, there wouldn't have been enough time for Link to get there. Which relates to why Link is there. He's not there to get the secret stones. He has no idea what those things are. Link goes to the 4 regions to help the people. Then, while Link's there, Ganon lures him closer to the temple with fake Zelda. It's like Ganondorf wants Link to find the secret stone. He and Link also don't even know each other. They meet at the very start and the very end. Remember in Ocarina of Time how Ganondorf spared Link because he admired his bravery? Well, there's nothing like that here. Rauru and Ganon are more rivals than anything. At least he has a great design. His Demon King form is incredibly imposing, and the Katana wheels is just cool. There's more I want to say about Ganondorf, but I'll save that for the ending. What about our other side characters? Are they any good? Well, our main side characters are the ancient and present sages. Let's start out with the ancient sages, because there's not much to them. They don't even have faces or names. They're just tools. They're not real characters. They didn't even try here. At least in Breath of the Wild, the champions had names and distinct personalities, but these guys are absolute nothing burgers. And don't even get me started on that horrible copy and pasted cutscene placed at the end of each dungeon. Seriously, how did they accept this? Why couldn't each one be unique? What if we learned more about, the imprisoning war and not just that one battle in the basement? Or what if the stages talked about their personal relationship with Ganondorf? Or give us anything about who they are, how the races were in the past? These guys even saw Zelda turn into a light dragon, so why couldn't they tell you in the cutscene? Instead, all we get is
Demon King? Secret Stone?
why do these cutscenes even exist too? All the modern day sages already help Link. That's what they've been doing the entire dungeon. And it's not like they used the info about the Demon King or imprisoning war. They could have been completely cut from the game and nothing would have changed. The current stages don't fare much better. They're all bland and generic. Tulin is the basic good kid character. Yunobo is Yunobo. And at least Riju and Sidon are cool. I like how they're grappling with their positions of power, trying to do what's best for the people while also struggling with their flaws. But I only care about them because I spent 6 years connecting with them in Breath of the Wild. Tears of the Kingdom does very little to their character. Each of the stages also get an arc. I say arc because they all start and end in like 2 scenes. You meet them and they have a character flaw, you leave to do something, you come back and their flaw is resolved. There's a total of 1 scene before the arc ends and starts. That's not a character arc, that's a character spike. He was utterly unearned and rushed, not allowing these characters to truly develop. Some other side characters include Sonia and Minru, who are just nothing. They have no personality to them at all, aside from their occupation and their powers. There's a ton more side characters, but I just don't care enough to discuss them. They're either too underutilized or just too boring. There's one final character left to talk about, the hero of Hyrule himself, Link. Link isn't much of a character, and that's fine I guess. His quietness is because he's supposed to be an audience surrogate. Still, as an audience surrogate, he should reflect what we feel, at least to some extent. For most of the game, Link has the same dead stare. I know he's stoic for lore reasons, but important events would be much more impactful if he showed any emotion. He shows more emotion when he's making pizza than for pivotal story moments, like when he finds out his girlfriend has become a mindless dragon forever. Any thoughts, Link? Feelings? No? A head empty? Oh, okay. Lastly, Link's arm. He got really lucky that he got wounded. If he didn't, he wouldn't be able to take on the dungeons, unlock the light routes, unlock the Zonite contracts, get the runes. Basically, if he didn't lose his arm, the entire game wouldn't have happened, and he would have started where he woke up. That's all for story and characters. However, many unanswered questions and missed opportunities remain, so let me go through my list. Nintendo, what was Malice? How is it related to Gloom? Is it related to Gloom? Is it a retcon of Malice? This one question has sparked so much debate and frustration, but the answer is right in front of them. Just say Malice is Gloom, but weakened because of Rauru's seal. And that's why we see Gloom in the past, and why Gloom is spilling out now. Rauru's seal is fading. But we couldn't even get that. Instead, we have to endlessly speculate on something Nintendo probably never even thought of. Where is the Sheikah tech? Did it disappear? What do you mean it did? According to an interview with Hitomaro Fubayashi, all the Sheikah tech just disappeared after Calamity Ganon was defeated. That's some
Somehow Palpatine returned.
level writing right there. And at least Rise of Skywalker had the balls to say it in the movie. Tears of the Kingdom makes you look for it in interviews. I can't believe Tears of the Kingdom just made me compliment Rise of Skywalker. This game is actually driving me insane. But that explanation is wrong, because in the cutscene after you beat Calamity Ganon in Breath of the Wild, what's that? The Divine Beast? And in Tears of the Kingdom, what's all this? Sure looks like Sheikah tech to me, but Sheikah tech was one of the most integral parts of Breath of the Wild, and they had so many opportunities to do cool stuff with it. Imagine if the Hylians were not piloting Guardians, or wielding Sheikah armor and weapons, or people turn the shrines and Divine Beasts into homes and training camps, or maybe we could pilot the Divine Beast. The most significant events of the Shrine of Resurrection. It was such a crucial part of the last game, that it being empty feels wrong here. Same with the other structures. The absence of the Sheikah tech makes these spots feel oddly empty. Why doesn't anyone remember us? Some characters like workers or children make sense. Even Bolson can make some sense, but there was no excuse for Hetsu not remembering us. Why do the temples exist? The Divine Beasts are weapons, but there's no explanation for these guys. If they're temples, then who are they worshipping? Hylia? If so, why are there no Hylia statues? Like, what is this ancient Goron city? Assuming the Gorons lived in the depths? If so, why did no other civilization live in the depths? Or why wasn't there a record of that?
Where on Hylia's Hyrule is Cass?
What's with the other dragons? Were they Zonai who ate the secret stone? If not, are they natural dragons? They're all named after a goddess, so are the goddess? Were the goddess Zonai? Why is this game trying to retcon Breath of the Wild? The Sheik are all gone. No one remembers you. Malice never existed. The champions never existed. Cass never existed. Calamity Ganon is mentioned twice in the whole game. Like, come on, you're a direct sequel. You're supposed to build off the last game's story. Not pretend it didn't exist. Breath of the Wild's story wasn't Carter's 2 level bad. Before we end the story segment, I want to briefly cover the voice acting. Breath of the Wild was the first ever Zelda game to have proper voice acting, aside from a few grunts and yells.
Hey, listen!
It was supposed to mark a new era for Zelda. They were putting on their big boy pants to stand with other AAA games, but they fumbled it so hard. Not only was the voice acting pretty mid and cheesy, but only cutscenes were voiced, so Tears of the Kingdom was an opportunity to fix these issues. But what do they do instead? The voice acting is still mediocre. It's not horrendous, but many lines lack emotion. I don't think it's an acting problem. I think it's more a directing problem because these actors can and are good. What's more, Tears of the Kingdom still only has voice acting for cutscenes. Everything else is just grunts and noises, making it very awkward to go from these actors saying complete sentences to text boxes with anime noises. Hey, editing me, but I realized that they completely missed the opportunity to bring back some of the voice actors from Age of Calamity. Imagine how much better the game would have been if we'd seen Jacob Crane as Robbie.
Which means we've got ourselves a brand new, never-before-witnessed Guardian model!
Kushina Valens well as Hetsu.
Oh, me? I am the one who brings song and dance to Korak Forest! Let's go!
Or especially Eric Bra as Koga.
You've got some nerve, thinking you can go toe-to-toe with Master Koga!
Anyway, back to Past Me. If they want to continue with voice acting, they must prioritize getting some good, high-quality actors, and ensuring every line of dialogue is voice acted. Yes, it's a big task, but 12 minutes, a game with a much lower budget, has an absolutely star-studded cast. Oblivion had full voice acting for every NPC nearly 20 years ago. This is Nintendo, and one of the most treasured IPs. Actors would be dying to be in the game. If Nintendo wants to avoid putting any work into their voice acting, then they should drop it altogether, because this approach isn't and hasn't been working for over 7 years. Also, lip sync the voices, like, come on. For any Zelda game, the dungeons are a massive part of its appeal. They're the lifeblood of the series, and have defined its identity for decades. That's why people were sorely disappointed when Breath of the Wild lacked any traditional dungeons. Instead, we got a bunch of mini, micro dungeons called shrines, and 4 shorter dungeons, the Divine Beast. While I liked them, they were not up to series standards. Thus, Tears of the Kingdom presented an opportunity to return to top-tier traditional Zelda dungeons, but we didn't get that. There are 5 main dungeons: the Wind Temple, Water Temple, Fire Temple, Lightning Temple, and Construct Factory / Spirit Temple, with 2 shorter dungeons, Thunder / Dragonhead Isles, and Hyrule Castle. General consensus is that these guys are better than the Divine Beast, but I don't agree. I think they're both on the same level of mid. On the exterior, the Divine Beasts look better. They're these giant mechanical animals roaming around their environment. Compare that to the temples, which just stand there. On the interior though, the temples are much better. They all have a unique, distinct theme and look different from one another compared to the blandness of the Divine Beast. All the temples follow the template of helping out the people of the village, meeting up with the sage, and raiding the dungeon. In the dungeon, you need to press 5 or 4 buttons and you fight the boss. Sound familiar? That's the Divine Beast again. Just because you call them temples doesn't make them dungeons. In terms of their puzzles, the puzzles in the temples are better, but with the Divine Beast, you can control and rotate them, so they level out. The lead-up for the temples is all better than Divine Beast lead-ups. However, the Divine Beasts at least have unique cutscenes, unlike the temples, which you know. With generalities out of the way, let's get specific. We'll go through each of the dungeons and their associated quests in the order the game most likely wants you to tackle them. Rito Village being ravaged by a devastating blizzard. I say devastating because it's not really doing much damage. The bridge is broken, but these are bird people. You think they care? The only consequence is, oh, it's a bit chilly, and they can't get their food, but like, just carry the food on your wings. You meet up with Tulin and Teba. Tulin storms off because he thinks he can take on the blizzard alone, and we have to find him. We go up the mountains, through this cave, and find Tulin. We help him get his bow back, and he learns the value of teamwork. Yippee. Now that we're with Tulin, we can prepare for the temple's ascent. The lead up to the dungeon is great. Slowly rising your way to the top, tension filling and the music rising alongside you. It all culminates with you climbing higher and higher, going so high you make it above the storm, and everything goes silent, the sky conjuring the darkest of clouds, until you make it right above the eye of the storm. And then and that whole lead up was perfect. The only issues are the hoverback can skip it all, and the gameplay is pretty dull. It's just jumping and breaking some ice. They probably should have taken more inspiration from the shrine that uses the same mechanic. Aside from that though, the lead up is great. Now that we're in the temple, things go downhill, and pretty quickly. The theme for this temple is that it's a ship, but it doesn't follow its theme at all. There's no captain's room, living quarters, kitchen, nothing that makes this an actual ship. It's just a bunch of rooms for you to puzzle in. This breaks the game's sense of immersion and makes it feel very gamey and artificial, which we've discussed before how a lot of other things in the game have that. To summon the boss, you need to release these 5 locks. Like the Divine Bees, these puzzles don't feel like dungeon puzzles, they feel like 5 separate shrines glued together. All of them even share the same solution of sticking icicles onto gear, which will take you like 5 seconds to figure out. Once you do, the rest of the dungeon is just busy work sticking on the icicles. So, really, there aren't 5 puzzles here, there's 2. The icicle one and the recall one. There's also this diving lock, but that's not a puzzle, that's a minigame. You'll probably spend more time listening to Toolin than doing puzzles. Every single time you complete a puzzle, he congratulates you and says how many you have left. Why? I can count, man. Every single companion in the dungeon does this, by the way. Once you unlock all the locks, Colgera appears. Visually, her design is incredible. Breaking her eyes is very satisfying, and I love the grand scale, with you and the beast soaring high above the clouds in the middle of a blizzard. Also, that music. However, it's just too easy. She sends tornadoes, but those aren't a threat, that's more of a minor inconvenience. Just a bit of stamina completely trivializes the entire fight. Once she's dead, you learn for the first time about the Demon King and the Secret Stones. And Tulin becomes our ghost buddy. While the music, visuals, and build-up are great, the dungeon itself is too short and simplistic. The Fire Temple is the most contentious dungeon in the entire game. You either love it or hate it. But what do I think about it? Well, I think it's mid. I don't think it's the worst dungeon ever, it's not even the worst one in this game, but it's not great either. The lead up starts in Goron City, where the Gorons have become addicted to this new delicious food called marbled rock roast. Yuno's been handing this stuff out, and acting very weirdly ever since the upheaval when Zelda gave him this luchador mask. You confront Yuno in a wet fart of a boss fight and break the mask. Link and Yuno will then ride a minecart. On top of the mountain, Miragi appears, and the boss fight was pretty cool. It was really easy, but that was intentional. It's supposed to be more of a spectacle and a tutorial for using Yunobo vehicles. You dive into the volcano and reach the Fire Temple, Lost Gorondia. The theme for this dungeon is that it's a lost ancient Goron city, but like the Wind Temple, this place doesn't follow its theme. The dungeon is an actual city, there's no stores, houses, places to chill, it's just a giant puzzle box, again, breaking the game's sense of immersion. The puzzles inside the dungeon are fine. They're fine. There's basically only one puzzle in the dungeon, using a hydrant to make a platform. Once you've done the first puzzle, you've done them all. It's not even an original idea too. Several shrines use the same concept of making platforms with a fire hydrant. Wow, not even the dungeon have original ideas. The puzzle is repeated 4 times, except the last one. I like the last one, at least it was different. The whole point of the dungeon is that you're supposed to slowly scale it using these minecarts. I actually like the minecarts. I think they're fun to use and their puzzles weren't that bad. The thing is though, you can skip all of it with Ascend, Tooling, and Climbing. And I do mean all of it. All these puzzles you can solve with just those 3 tools. It's not like people aren't going to have those tools either. Everyone can climb, everyone can ascend, and Tooling is a stage most people have first. Sometimes the solutions even support the cheese. Like, the more obvious and intuitive answer is to just cheese it. I did the puzzles the intended way for the review, but if you didn't, I don't blame you. This is the game's fault for letting you cheese it so easily, and if they don't want you, they shouldn't have made it so easy and obvious. On my first playthrough, I cheesed it and I didn't even know. The map was so confusing and unhelpful, and the dungeon's layout was so horribly designed that most players are just gonna cheese it. It's just the more straightforward thing to do. I think that's why the dungeon is mixed. If you cheesed it, it's really boring and bad. But if you didn't, you probably liked it. Once you get all the locks, you fight Marbled Coma. The boss fight, like the dungeon, is fine. It's not horrible, it's just so easy to answer if we can do anything special. We then get another Demon King Secret Zone cutscene.
I'd like nothing more than to smash the Demon King.
In short, the Fire Dungeon is nowhere near great, but it's not the worst dungeon ever. It's not even the worst one in this game. That one comes right now. The Water Dungeon, or the Great Wellspring of Hyrule, is terrible. Zora's domain has been infected with a bunch of muck. You meet with Sidon's new fiancé, who informs you to speak with Sidon. We meet with Sidon, and Sidon tells us to talk with his historian, who needs help figuring out this text. After helping him out, he tells us to look for King Donovan, but he's not in his throne room. Instead, we learn from some Zora kids that he's in the secret underwater entrance. It was really cool seeing the king wounded. He's such a hulking beast that it gives the impression that whatever hurt him must have been seriously dangerous. He gives us his scales, which the more you think of it, the weirder it is. Like, he ripped off his own skin right in front of us while laughing. You then solve this riddle by shooting a scale arrow through a floating water droplet. We meet up with Sidon to open a vortex straight into the ancient Zora waterworks, but before that, we have to fight a boss, the Sludge Lake. It's just a lake but covered in sludge. Its purpose is probably just to teach you how to use Sidon's ability, but it's laughably easy, and incredibly disappointing that this thing hurt the king. Like, seriously? Back to Zora Waterworks, this place is really cool. It has such a good atmosphere, and the puzzles aren't that bad either. At first, I thought this was the dungeon. Compared to the other quests, the dungeon started around this time, so I was getting hyped to have an underground water dungeon. But unfortunately, it's just a big room where all you do is press one button, and you're out. Man, what a wasted opportunity. We're finally ready to start the climb up to the temple, and it's terrible. It's like the Wind Temple, where you have to slowly go higher and higher, except the Wind Temple at least had an intense atmosphere and great music. This one is just boring. There's no threat or danger, you're just slowly going higher and higher, worsened by the zero gravity. For some unexplained reason, this part of the sky has zero gravity. It's unique, but it just makes everything so much slower than it already is. After finally making the dungeon, whoa, this place is ugly. There's no cool theme or idea. It's just 4 separate islands which could be mistaken for any other island. Basically, it has no sauce. Once we're in the dungeon, we got the same thing as always. Except for some reason, this one only has 4 switches instead of 5. But hey, I'm not complaining. Less time here is a blessing. The puzzles in this dungeon are, what do you think? Terrible. They're all very obvious. Some of them don't even feel like puzzles. Like this one you solve by shooting 2 arrows in bullet time. All the other ones don't fare much better either. The stuff you need is all right there, so it's no real aha moment. It's like seeing a jigsaw puzzle where there are only 2 pieces left. Sure, you completed it, but did you do it? And of course, there's a gravity making everything so much slower. Once you get all the switches, the boss appears, Muktarok. He's the worst boss out of these 4. All you do is use Sidon once and wail on him. You don't even need Sidon either, you can just use splash fruits. Over before it even starts. I like his little legs though. After beating our friend over here, we learn about, well, you know. But wait, the quest's not done yet, because in Zora's domain, Sidon is crowned king. Good for him. So yeah, the water dungeon is easily the worst in the entire game, and among the worst, if not the worst, of the entire Zelda franchise. It's short, slow, ugly, and a slog to get through. The final primary dungeon is the Lightning Temple, Merle's myth risen from the sands. This dungeon is the best of the entire game and Wild Era. We start in Gerudo Town, where... yeah, these things called Gibdos and a sandstorm have driven everyone underground. I didn't talk about Gibdos in the comment section because I want to talk about them here. I love Gibdos, or at least everything about them except fighting them. They're like these undead bug people who look really creepy. These winged versions are nightmare fuel, and when you weaken a Gibdo and it starts crawling around the floor, like, oh, that's just terrifying. The only problem is actually fighting them. It's annoying to have an elemental weapon, and they're down like 2 hits, so they don't even pose a threat. To help out the town, meet with Reiju, and use your ability to defend Karakara Bazaar and then Gerudo Town itself. This section is pretty neat. I like organizing the soldiers, but it doesn't matter considering how easy it is. But hey, that music slaps. After that, we do a pretty decent puzzle/riddle.
Light puzzle? What is a bad puzzle?
Once we're in the dungeon, it's great. Unlike the other dungeon, it actually plays into its theme. This temple actually feels like an ancient burial ground. There are coffins, traps, statues. It's very Indiana Jones inspired. Of course, it could always lean into it more. It does it much better than the other temples combined. In terms of the puzzles, these guys are great too. The first one is the exception though. All you do is move bricks. But ignoring that one, they all revolve around light. The puzzles here are also quite lengthy. They usually involve multiple parts, unlike the other temples where you do one thing and that's it. You also can't cheese them either because of the way the temple is designed and because Reiju can't just teleport to you. You have to consider how she's gonna get to you. I don't know why she's the only companion that works away, but at least one of the dungeons are good puzzles. After getting all the switches, we fight the boss, Queen Gibdo. Her design looks great. She's horrifyingly awesome, and I love what she does with her hands. It's like she's planning something. Fighting her also ain't half bad. She packed a punch on my first playthrough, and you can't just cheese her with shock fruit. She's probably my favorite fight out of the 4, because it's somewhat tricky considering her sheer power, tankiness, and the Gibdo Swarm. After the boss, you know the drill, and Gerudo Town has been sent back to normal. Overall, the Lightning Temple is very well designed, with clever puzzles and terrifying enemies. It will still rank pretty mid-tier for normal Zelda dungeons, but for Wild Era Zelda, it's top tier. More of this please, less of that. Despite the Thunder Temple's quality, it's held down by that new formula. Meet the stage, do some tasks, hit the switches. I don't know why they need to adhere to the formula. Why not try something new, something more linear, more traditional? We already have all of Hyrule to do whatever we want, so why not confine and restrict us in the dungeons? That way, we can get back to that classic Zelda experience instead of being given basically the same experience with a different set of paint 8 times in a row. After helping out all the towns, we meet with Pearl at Lookout Landing. When we're there, oh, I wonder if this obviously fake Zelda is fake Zelda. We follow Zelda into Hyrule Castle, where we encounter this game's take on Hyrule Castle. Compared to Breath of the Wild, this Hyrule Castle is so much worse. In Breath of the Wild, Hyrule Castle was the highlight of the game. Raiding the castle, sneaking around, getting jump scared by Lionels, finding the Hylian shield, the shrine, traversing it, the formidable enemies, and tons of secrets. It was nearly perfect. Here though, it's a glorified straight shot. You go to one room, kill some enemies, you go another room, kill some enemies, you go another room, kill some enemies, repeat. It's very bland and pales in comparison to Breath of the Wild's Hyrule Castle. There's no exploring, it's just fighting, and it's fighting the same guys we fought the entire game. It's only really considered a dungeon because you have a unique map for here, and Breath of the Wild's Hyrule Castle is commonly considered a dungeon. But here, calling it a dungeon is a stretch. It's more of an extended hallway with enemies. The only thing keeping Tears of the Kingdom's Hyrule Castle afloat is the boss rush at the end. Phantom Ganon is always a fun fight, and fighting a bunch of them was actually really fun. And also, it turns out that obviously fake Zelda is obviously fake. Who would have thought, huh? After our fight with Phantom Ganon, we'd head back to Lookout Landing and realize we're missing something, or should I say, someone, the final 5th Sage's spirit. To find her, you go to the Zona ruins, get this armor, and head into Thunderhead Isles. Thunderhead Isles are pretty meh. It's a linear set of puzzles, sorta like the Great Sky Island ones, but too much so. Some of these puzzles feel ripped right out of the Great Sky Island. The only problem is that we're nearly done with the game. Those puzzles were simple and easy because we're the start of the game. These ones are simple and easy because, I don't know. Like, you build it right here. Now stand here. We've done it 1,000 times. The island serves as lead up to the Dragonhead Isles, but for some reason they put Thunderhead Isles above Dragonhead Isles, so you can just skip the whole thing. Even if you do go on Thunderhead Isles, you can skip the whole thing again with the hover bike. On Dragonhead Isles, all there is here is a door that requires some hearts to open, and inside, a mask. We follow this mysterious mask's directions as the voice calls out to us. We then reach the final dungeon, the Construct Factory. This dungeon is split into 2 parts, the Construct Factory and the Spirit Temple. The dungeon itself is the Construct Factory, the Spirit Temple is just the boss room. This temple differs slightly from the others. Instead of hitting 4 buttons, we retrieve 4 different parts of the body to reconstruct the mech. But practically, it's the same thing. I actually quite enjoy the Spirit Temple. There aren't any enemies here, which is kind of a bummer. Instead, the focus is solely on the puzzles, and they aren't that bad. They're all about the Zona devices, getting you to think about how they interact with one another and the environment. It's decent stuff. I like this one here to make it right at the rail, or this one you send it flying. However, it's too short. Many of these puzzles are just one puzzle long. Like the ones I mentioned before, that's it. That's all to them. After you do that, you bring it to the body. It's a shame because this temple had a lot of potential, but he was just too short. After gathering the 4 parts, we now get our mech. And, well, you know. We ride the mech to the Spirit Temple. We have a boss fight with the Sea's Construct. I like the idea of the fight. Having a cage fight with another mech is admittedly cool. Lamentably though, the fight is so cumbersome due to how awful the mech is to control. After defeating the boss, we get a cutscene that's like the Demon King Secret Zone cutscenes, but not entirely. Man, all these cutscenes tell the exact same thing. Did we need 5 cutscenes telling us how Demon King is bad? At least we actually get to see the fight.
Thousands of years will pass on the blink of an eye. You only delay the inevitable.
You're wrong. Years from now, someone will appear with the sword that seals the darkness. A swordsman with the power to defeat you, Link. Remember this name.
Link. Interesting. I look forward to meeting you.
To sum up, Tears of the Kingdom's dungeons are a massive missed opportunity. They're very short and straightforward, lack the cleverness of Zelda dungeons of old, and are overly formulaic. Nonetheless, they offer some hope for Zelda's future, as the leaders were pretty great, the music is some of the best in a Zelda game, and the themes are unique and distinct. Instead of a traditional Zelda approach, where the puzzles were spread out through several large dungeons, Breath of the Wild opted for smaller micro-dungeons called shrines. The ancient Sheikah created them to test the power of the ancient hero and ready him for his fight against Calamity Ganon. Shrines were polarizing. Some loved their bite-sized puzzles, but others felt they were too short and shallow. Personally, I think they were pretty good. Unlike most, I actually love the test of strength, and some of the shrines, like Eventide or Blue Flame, were genuinely terrific, lengthy, and in-depth shrines. My only problem is that I wish we'd gotten more of those type of shrines. Instead of 120 tiny shrines, we should have gotten more around 80 or even less than that longer shrines. That way, each shrine can explore its mechanics to its full potential, allowing for great puzzling possibilities. Before we enter shrines, let's look at the outside. As mentioned before, Breath of the Wild shrines made perfect sense as to why they existed. Never broke your immersion as to why these puzzles existed. It made perfect sense, and their black and blues with a touch of orange added a lot of visual flair, even if it was overly reused 120 times. The exterior also looked great, these elaborate secret machines that would transport its hidden pocket dimension. Tears of the Kingdom shrines are a big rock. For some reason, they were created by Rauru and Sonia to cleanse dark magic, but that doesn't make sense because Ganon and his gloom didn't exist yet. Unless you're telling me that Rauru and Sonia managed to find enough time to build 152 shrines during the imprisoning war, which I refuse to believe. The game tried to lean more into the magical element with the shrines, but didn't fully commit to it. Instead, the shrines are stuck in this middle ground of magic technology, but we already had technology in the last game. This game should have distinguished itself by fully leaning into that magic part. Nonetheless, let's enter these shrines through this admittedly cool door and see how Tears of the Kingdom addresses the issues with Breath of the Wild. Oh, they didn't. Tears of the Kingdom has a whopping 152 shrines, 52 of which are blessings. The blessing is usually made up for because the shrine has a quest associated with it, like the Burn of the Mountain or the Labyrinths from Breath of the Wild. However, Tears of the Kingdom has only 31 shrine quests. That means 21 blessings have absolutely no quest related to them. We'll cover those types of blessings first, then we'll do the quest. The most infamous example of this type of shrine would be the Otutum Shrine in the Gerudo Highlands. This is the pinnacle of this game's laziness regarding shrines. There's no danger outside, a quest related to it, a puzzle you have to solve to enter it, nothing. You walk up to it and you get a free shrine. While that's the most egregious example, there are still plenty of others. Taki Iban and Maokis are basically empty shrines. There's a slight challenge in finding them because they're in a cave, but you can just use your Sheikah sensor and light roots to find them. Once you're in the cave, that's it. You walk up and get your blessing. There are some enemies outside, and Taka Iban even has gloom hands, but they're so easy to avoid it shouldn't even count. Some shrines are just empty to serve as war points, such as Kahata Noom in the Wind Temple Ascent, or Joku-U in the Dragonhead Isles. While the latter should exist because the door that requires 10 hearts, coming here only to realize you can't do it and have to redo the entire process would be very annoying. The former, though, does not have the same benefit. I don't know why the Kamuya shrine even exists. There should have been at least something here. These shrines, and all shrines really, but especially these ones because there's nothing in them, are marred by the fact they have to skip 4 separate cutscenes every single time you do a shrine. Just cut this stuff out, you just waste our time for no reason. Having said that, some of these blessing shrines that don't have a shrine quest associated with them do have content. For example, the Suarak shrine is attained by completing the Yi clan exam, which is labeled as a side adventure and not a shrine quest for some reason. When I first got this quest, I was really excited. I was infiltrating the Yi clan. Was it going to take down the clan from the inside or learn the secrets of their power? No! You go to 5 spots and offer the bananas. They're not even hidden well. They're just out in the open. One's in a cave, but the enemies are so easy to avoid, it shouldn't even count. Once you do that, you go back and get your shrine. It's longer than most shrine quests, but that's because the locations are spread out. In terms of actual content, it's exceedingly shallow. Another lowlight is the labyrinth. You follow the acorns and you get a free shrine. Wow, what a challenge. On the other hand, some of these blessings are really good. The Jichim shrine has you exploring the Gerudo ancient prison ruins. The Mari'in shrine has you clearing out Eventide Isle from pirates. And Geotack has you riding minecarts and hitting switches to act as a shrine. These lengthy, in-depth, and challenging lead-ups are worth their blessing, even if I would have loved if they had actual puzzle inside. Those are blessings with no shrine quest, but what about actual shrine quest? Well, a staggering 25 of those shrine quests are the Green Rock quest. Most of them are in the sky, where each build its own device and that's it. There's no shake up with combat or some extra spiciness with the weather, it's just build a plane and go. Or they make you rotate this thing to connect the islands, but that's not a puzzle, it's spamming the R button until it works. Some of these crystals try to break it up by making you fight a flux construct, which is fun, but of course flux constructs are constantly reused and you don't even have to fight the guy, you can just take it and leave, making it even more boring. Some of these crystal shrines are on land though. One of them has you show a giant horse to this guy, or this one, which has you send it down from the sky into this vortex. But that's it, they're extremely short, and it's not the puzzles are super complicated, it's stuff you've been doing the entire game. Attaching rockets to stuff or fighting a Hinox is not new exciting content or worth a shrine. My least favorite one is a pretty stone and 5 golden apples, where you give the Korok 5 golden apples, and that's it. Discounting the crystal shrines leaves us with only 6 shrine quests, and that's not much, so we'll cover them. The White Bird guidance is about this Hyrule lady giving you some really vague clues as to the location of a shrine in a cave. However, in both of my playthroughs, I never even knew this lady existed, because you can just walk right into the cave like any other ordinary cave. Once you're in the shrine, there's a decent enough physics puzzle, but you can just cheese it with bomb arrows. We'll talk about that more later. Legend of the Soaring Spear has you solve a riddle. Throw the Zonai Spear with a wing from the pedestal through the ring. Should your aim be true and right, you'll be blessed with the spelling light. That's not a riddle though, those are instructions, and once you're done with that, you get an empty shrine. Dying to find it requires you to align this column shadow with the white pattern. It's decently challenging, or at least it was to me, so you get a sticker. Good job. Maka's Special Palace is given to you by a Korok, tells you that the shrine can't be accessed normally through the forest. Instead, you have to skydive from above into the shrine. Skydiving is a good set piece, but more is needed to make it worthy of a blessing. Keys Born of Water has you make ice blocks and then melt them to fit the slot. Finding out what to do can be challenging enough, but then it's just tedium repeating it 3 times in a row. The High Spring and Light Rings involves snowboarding from the sky down a mountain. Once you're in the shrine, you get one of my favorite proving grounds. This shrine quest gets an A+ from me. Snowboarding is really fun and the shrine is really great too. Good job. Aside from blessing and shrine quests, for some godforsaken reason, Tears of the Kingdom has around a dozen combat tutorial shrines. Breath of the Wild had a combat tutorial shrine, but it was just the one in Kakariko Village, a place most players visit near the very start of their journey. Instead, Tears of the Kingdom split that one shrine into 12 seemingly arbitrarily placed shrines. For example, you get an archery tutorial after doing a skydiving section. Not only do we learn about archery in the Great Sky Island, but why is it here of all places? The skydive is pretty high up, which means you would have needed to do quite a bit of exploring to get here. So for most people, this shrine will be completely useless. Barring their placements, these shrines are unfathomably redundant. Most of these mechanics players will know by the time they finish the Great Sky Island. Doubly so if you played Breath of the Wild, so why are they in the game? This just reeks of padding and filler to stretch that shrine number as high as possible. Oh, and also,
Spaghetti. Spaghetti. Ravioli. Mamma mia. Nighty. Spaghetti.
Tears of the Kingdom also features tutorials for the Zonai devices. Where the combat tutorials were utterly boring and useless, these are more interesting, but still pretty useless. For example, a flying device. This shrine teaches you that planes exist? I don't know what they were going for here. Every player will already know how planes work and how they interact with things' weight, because we did it on the Great Sky Island. Even if this is your very first shrine, which obviously it's not going to be considering its location, it's still wholly unneeded, but they're at least a little fun. Messing around with Zonai devices is always entertaining. They often demonstrate very obscure and fascinating ways to use these Zonai devices that I would have never thought of, even though you'll probably never use it again in the rest of your playthrough. We can now talk about your everyday, run-of-the-mill shrines, the ones that find you exploring Hyrule. I don't want to call them bad, but I wouldn't call them great either. The biggest problem with the shrines is their brevity. They're just too short. Many of them are just one puzzle long, and that's it. Take for example, Gatansis. All you do is make the ball bounce once, and that's it. Or Andemic, where you use recall once, and that's it. Kyogon is also one puzzle long, but it makes more sense. You have to look at the roof and match it by putting the balls in the hole. That's not a puzzle though, that's being observative, and once you figure it out, it's tedium filling the other holes. Several other shrines have the same tedium problem, like Siguku Shrine. You just reverse the gears. The concept is not only reused in the shrine, but countless other times throughout the game. Speaking of repeating concepts, that's what we're going to talk about next. Jutagomak and Apogek are all just about riding a wing, and that's it. Rasikawak and Jonsu are about this bouncy ball. I like the material, but you never use it anywhere in the game. Karunar and Tamawak have you make cobblestone with the hydration device to cross lava. Tuarawak, Serabatomak, and Sibajitak basically all just have you spam a sand until it's over. For some reason, there are 2 tutorial shrines for archery and throwing. Sorry for all the examples, but I just want to be thorough to fully explain how repetitive these shrines are. I didn't even talk about other concepts that get repeated, but I think you get the point. These shrines could have easily been combined with one another into longer, more in-depth shrines, so we could actually sink our teeth into these puzzles, instead of what we have here, where they end as soon as they start. Want to get nitpicky? The placement of the shrines are really weird. Tears of the Kingdom can't just put the shrines in the same place as Breath of the Wild, so they had to think of new locations, but they're off. For instance, there's no shrine within a reasonable distance of the Great Fairies. You either have to spend 2 minutes getting there or use your child medallion. And none of the stable shrines even face a stable. The ones placed in major POIs are usually either on the outskirts or at the bottom, meaning again, you have to waste like 2 minutes getting there. Like I said, these are really just glorified nitpicks, but the minutes add up, especially the longer you play. Tears of the Kingdom, however, has one final type of shrine, the Proving Grounds. These shrines serve as this game's take on the test of strength, and While I miss the test strength, especially the tough ones, I have to admit these are a vast improvement. Proving grounds strip you of all your possessions and only give you a few weak ones, forcing you to make do against these now intimidating constructs. That alone makes them great shrines. The combat is actually engaging now because you have to think about what you're doing and can't just heal your way out of it, but they add to it by having each shrine have a gimmick. Some gimmicks can be pretty lame, like this one where it's just reversing gears, or the infiltrating one where the shtick just didn't work, but the vast majority are really good. There's this one where everything is pitch black, so you have to fight in the darkness, or this one where you send Roombas to attack everyone, or this one where you have to make your way up using these things and killing everything along the way, or my favorite, not even of the proving grounds, but of all shrines, where you have to build a vehicle and then ram over all the constructs. It was just pure fun and satisfaction. Proving grounds were a great addition, and if shrines continue, these guys need to stay. However, all the shrines have a little conundrum with them. For instance, the dive ceremonies. There are 3 dive ceremonies spread throughout the skies of Hyrule, and they all give you a shrine. 2 of the shrines have content, and like I said before, one of them is an archer tutorial, and the other one is a proving ground. The last shrine, though, is completely empty, or the Nuda shrine, which makes you cross a freezing river and then access it. Considering the rest of the cave shrines, you'd think it'd be empty, right? But no. There's a proving ground inside. There are tons more examples, like the Zaku Shrine, which makes you snowboard down a mountain, but still has a proving ground inside. These inconsistencies make me think that every shrine was supposed to have content. It would explain the spottiness of the blessings, why some shrines that have a lead up which constitutes a blessing give you an actual shrine, while others that don't constitute a blessing give you nothing. I think it's because the team was rushed. They wanted every shrine to have content, but the ones that are missing, just make them have blessings. But like, they had 6 years to make this game. What were they doing in all that time that they had to leave a third of all shrines, a core of the game, maybe the core of the game alongside the exploration, empty? By the way, I'm not complaining that there's content. I love that there's puzzles inside. I'm just complaining about the seemingly random way the blessings are spread out. Remember how I said we're going to talk about the bomb cheese? That's right now. Tears of the Kingdom openness and player freedom were a horrible idea for the shrines. There are so many ways to cheese them, whether it's recall plus ascend, the bomb cheese, rocket shield, bomb shields, or so many other ways. You might say that this freedom allows for players to express themselves and be creative, but I strongly disagree. This freedom doesn't incentivize creativity, it kills creativity. Whenever you see a target or a large gap, you're always just gonna rocket shield or bomb it. Why wouldn't you? It's human nature to go for the easy solution. Plus, it's not like these puzzles are super fun. The first time you use this cheese, you're thinking creatively by considering all your available options. All the other times though, that's not creativity, it's skipping the puzzle. Instead, they should have restricted us. Restriction is what fosters creativity. Being limited forces us to think outside the box on how to beat the puzzle. Why do you think people love Eventide or the Proving Ground so much? It's because they restrict us and force us to confront the issue. Like older Zelda puzzle designs, the shrines should have been much more linear, constricted experiences. We already have the open world to do whatever we want, so they should have tightened our ability to cheese and forced us to think creatively of how to solve these shrines. The game's freedom also contradicts how puzzles typically work in a video game. In most puzzle games, there's a difficulty curve. You start with simpler puzzles and then deal with the harder and harder ones, giving you that sense of satisfaction and challenge as the game progresses. But Tears of the Kingdom can't do that because of the openness. Hypothetically, any shrine could be anyone's first, so each shrine is equally simple. They don't want players running into a shrine and being completely stumped, but they should do that. Give us harder shrines. You get the war point when you visit the shrine, not when you beat it, so it'll be like a player's white whale. Suppose you come upon a super hard shrine, not combat wise but puzzle wise. You're just not experienced enough and don't know the game well enough to beat the puzzle, so you can't beat it. Instead, you leave, and hours later, you come back to the shrine. It's a struggle, but finally you conquered it. You mastered the game systems and overcame the shrine, finally hunting your white whale. Imagine how much more satisfying that would be than... If you disagree with me with the puzzle difficulty, then please play the Champion's Ballad. That DLC shrines are easily among the best shrines in both games. The devs knew the players would only hit these shrines near the endgame, so they can make them as challenging, lengthy, and in-depth as possible. If they had applied that philosophy to more Tears of the Kingdom shrines, we would have probably gotten one of the best Zelda games. Of course, we would still need easy shrines to introduce the player, but just put them in early game areas and harder ones in endgame areas to subtly guide the player. Rather, you got 152 short, boringly easy, bloated filler shrines. That number, 152, is a problem with the shrines. So many shrines repeat themselves, are too short, or lack depth. Instead, if you'd gone maybe 80 to 100 shrines, maybe even less than that, and the shrines were all longer, more in depth, and restricted, I think that would have been much better for the game. the devs could explore the game systems to their full potential and force players to actually engage their brains on how to beat the puzzles. Zelda's always been a series that challenges players with their puzzle design, and the wider games have been lacking in that aspect, so hopefully future games take a more traditional Zelda approach to the puzzle design. Breath of the Wild side quests were pretty lame. 90% of them were show me picture this, give me that, move this. It was all very mundane. That 10% though was special. Of course, there was Terry Town. We built a town from the ground up, traveling all through Hyrule to gather citizens, culminating wedding and the opening of the new town. It was a great quest, so in Tears of the Kingdom, I was looking forward to that and less give me 10 Flint. And I kinda got my wish. Regular side quests are just as bad, they're the same mindless busy work as before, and the reward is never worth it. It's usually rupees, monster parts, food, an elixir, or maybe a glider fabric if you're lucky. Glider fabrics are a nice reward, but you can't swap them in the menu, and the coolest ones are all locked behind amiibo. The other rewards are okay, I always want my rupees, but it's just not worth the busy worker time, not to mention how lame they are. But Tears of the Kingdom introduced a new type of side quest called side adventures. These are lengthier, meatier versions of regular side quests. Instead of being one step, usually involving one person, these involve several steps with many people. The only problem is that they're not that fun. Let me show you what I mean. Lurelin Village has been invaded by a bunch of pirates. Don't get your hopes up, it's just bokoblins. They don't even wear a funny pirate hat. You defeat them, gather materials for Bolson, and rebuild the village. I picked out this side quest because it's obviously meant to be one of the more important ones. All throughout Hyrule, NPCs mention how pirates have invaded Lurelin, building suspense and intrigue. This makes it even more disappointing when the quest is just fight some mobs, get logs, and spam the rotate button until you get the tree into the hole. It's the closest thing I wanted to rebuilding Hyrule, but it's not quite there yet. You're not building something new, you're rebuilding something from the last game. And if they're gonna let us rebuild Lurelin, let us go all out. Let us use Ultraman to create our own unique houses, Minecraft or Sim style, you know? The world is among the most unique in the whole game. Because you save Lurelin, everything is free, from the restaurant to the inn. It's an interesting idea, but it serves no purpose. Inns are useless, and I can already make my own food. Hudson and Ronson from Breath of the Wild have had their kid between games, Madison. You talk to Madison in a room, then to their grandparents, and answer a single question. You block this guy's view, head down, give Hudson 10 sunny lines, and watch a cutscene. See what I mean? These quests aren't fun. There's no thinking or puzzle solving. It's going over here, then over here, then over here. The reward for all this is the ability to build your own house. It's a nice idea, but the mechanics are too constricting and clunky. Lastly, I want to cover one final side adventure, and it's easily the best one. It's about the return of a fan-favorite villain, the Master Koga side adventure. This side adventure has you following Koga around the depths. You fight him a few times in some very easy boss fights, and then have another very easy mega boss fight. Your reward is crystallized charges and extremely obvious and fake out lore. It's the best side adventure, not for its gameplay, but because of this beauty of a man, Master Koga. Master Koga is legitimately the funniest part of the game. I love his animations, his dialogue is hilarious, his music is peak, and talking with him is just a joy. Even if the rewards and actual content were weak, I'll take any excuse for more screen time with this guy. If you haven't noticed by now, a massive problem below side quests and adventures are the rewards. I don't care at all about these NPCs, except Koga, so the main reason I'm doing the quest is for the reward, but they usually suck. Normal side quests are utterly worthless, and side adventures try to shake it up, but more is needed. Again, most quest rewards are just rupees. We should have gotten more unique rewards that are actually useful, gameplay or aesthetic wise. Nearly every player did the Haitano Village quest. Surprisingly, everyone wants to put Link's Hood down, even though it should have been out of the box feature. Or the Great Fairy quest, because upgrading armor is essential to progression. We need more of these types of cool, unique rewards and fewer rupees. Or they don't even have to be unique. What if quests expanded your meal slot or taught you new, powerful fighting techniques? These rewards are helpful, provide a genuine sense of progression, and give us a well-deserved nerf. Lastly, there's one final quest I want to talk about. It's not really a side quest, but it's not really a main quest either. It's the Korok Forest / Master Sword quest, and oh boy, is it a good one. Recovering the Hero Sword, or Master Sword quest, is phenomenal. It starts in Korok Forest, or technically doesn't, because you can't enter the Korok Forest normally. Instead, there's this conveniently placed chasm right next to the forest. So maybe, after following the pose and ascending up the pillar into the forest, what happened here? Everything is so dead and quiet. It's a complete juxtaposition to how alive it was in Breath of the Wild, which surprised me quite a bit on my first playthrough. After exploring for a bit, you find this hole inside the Great Deku Tree, where Gloomhands reside. After the fight with them and Phantom Ganon, the forest is restored, and it tells you to look for the Master Sword. I like this Korok Forest quest. Seeing in the ruins is great, and Gloomhands as Phantom Ganon is always a fun fight. Now, it's time to get the Master Sword. The Master Sword was sent back in time, and Zelda, as the Light Dragon, has been preparing it, bathing it in sacred power to ready it against the fight with Ganondorf. We make our way up to the Light Dragon, reach its head, and try to take the Master Sword. The dragon struggles against you, testing your stamina, until... Transported into this new world, Link pulls the Master Sword in complete silence, with the gravity Zelda's sacrifice finally setting in. Link draws the sword close, almost like he's apologizing or welcoming back an old friend. Finally, in triumph and sorrow, this was perfect. The build-up, trying to rip out the dragon's head, the actual pull, the music, oh my, the music is so good. Everything in the scene is absolutely perfect. It still gives me goosebumps whenever I rewatch it, or even talk about it right now. With the Master Sword in our possession, the sages ready, and memories in our pocket, let's head back to the Hyrule Castle one last time to defeat the Demon King, Ganondorf. Tears of the Kingdom's ending is one of the only parts of the game which is vastly superior to Breath of the Wild, although it doesn't start out that way. The deaths below Hyrule Castle are abysmal. This place is basically a hallway full of the most annoying enemies. I swear, they purposely put electric crease and ice like just to piss you off. After running through all the enemies, because let's be honest, who's fighting all that, we return to the very start of the game. We even see the torch Zelda had. We then face a boss rush, but with enemies and with the help of the sages. Not gonna lie, seeing them really hyped me up. It was like a this is it moment. After clearing all the waves, the dungeon boss will reappear, but the sages fight them off. Again, I love this moment. Seeing the sages who needed your help to fight them before, now being able to defeat them by themselves was such excellent character development, even though we didn't get to see it. We're now all alone as we head by ourselves to fight Ganondorf. Ganondorf's introduction is amazing. The lines are incredibly generic, but Matt Mercer's performance completely sells it. Not to mention the little animations, the sound design, and the music. This final fight is not only the best of the entire game, but the best of Wild Area Zelda and amongst the best of all Zelda games. Ganondorf has a varied moveset, with many different weapons, attacks, and even some magic thrown in. Like I said before about Phantom Ganon, it's all about mastering that timing to get that perfect flare rush opportunity against a hard-hitting, tanky enemy, which is what this combat system excels at. Once we take down his first health bar, that gag managed to somehow be simultaneously hilarious and terrifying. He summons 5 Phantom clones, but slowly the sages return, each taking on one of the Phantoms. Once he reaches half health, he resets the battle to a 1v1, no items, Fox only final destination. This fight is like a more challenging, better version of his first ace, if that's even possible, aided by the dramatic atmosphere, fantastic music, and of course, Matt Mercer's excellent performance. After beating Ganondorf, the Demon King eats his Secret Stone, and pause. We need to talk about this moment. A lot of people misinterpret why Ganondorf did this. Most people see this as Ganon being upset that he lost, like he's having gamer rage or something and losing the 1v1. But that's not what this is. Instead, it's supposed to be that even if Ganondorf can't rule as himself, he can still at least be king in some way as a malevolent dragon, enforcing his will and casting all of Hyrule into eternal night. But the dialogue definitely conveys it more as him being a sore loser than him trying to desperately be king no matter what, which is what fuels the misinterpretation people have. So it needs a bit of readjustment to better convey what Ganondorf actually meant with his final act. Nonetheless, you know the rules. Eat a Secret Stone, become a dragon, which is exactly what happens. The Demon Dragon drags you up to the skies of Hyrule until the Light Dragon races in. It's a classic Zelda tradition to have the titular princess swoop in the final battle to help Link, and it's great to see it here. The fight against the Demon Dragon is sort of like the fight against Dark Beast Ganon, but perfected. Against Dark Beast Ganon, you just run around on your horse, shooting the glowing spots. Here, you're diving through the skies of Hyrule as 2 immortal dragons engage in combat. And that music! All of the music in this entire final hour is so good it carries everything else. Mechanically, there's no challenge. You go to spots and whack them, but that's the point. This fight is your reward, a spectacle after the actual battle against Ganondorf. We land one final attack against the Demon Dragon, breaking his Secret Stone. Finally, After thousands of years, countless lives, and a broken Master Sword, Ganondorf is defeated. Link's arm starts to glow, and he and the Light Dragon are transported to this pocket dimension, where Rauru and Sonia turn Zelda back into a human. Link and Zelda then reappear, miles in the sky. Link dives to reach Zelda, and catches her, paralleling the start of the game where he barely missed her. With Zelda in his arm, Link dives to the very same body of water where he started, carrying her out bridal style, mind you. Zelda and Link finally reunite, and she can't wait to tell him about everything she's done. Princess Zelda has been found. It's such an emotional and impactful sequence of events. It honestly gave me goosebumps. I just wish Zelda and Link would have kissed, or at least hugged. They've been through a lot. Alright, let's talk about the elephant in the room, Zelda transforming back. Let's be honest, did anyone actually expect her to stay a dragon? Like, this is Nintendo, come on. She was obviously going to turn back into a human. I just wish they handled it better. Rauru's already moved on, so how is it here? And Sonia's just a human, how does she have a Force Ghost? It could be because of her Secret Stone, but Link didn't exactly treat that thing gently. What if there was a good and bad ending? Good ending would be the one we got, where Zelda turns back into a human. But the bad one could be where if you don't view all the memories, get the Master Sword and get all the stages, then you defeat Ganondorf, but Zelda saves the dragon. It'd feel more appropriate for Zelda to turn back after all the hours you put into the game. If you get all the memories, the game has one final secret cutscene, which depicts Mineru's spirit moving on, and the stages making their routes to Zelda. As the game sent me back to the title screen, the only thoughts I had left were, what a game. What a beautiful, disappointing game. Tears of the Kingdom is a first-party mainline Zelda game, so of course the music is good. It would have been great to see some more original tracks, and the reuse of Breath of the Wild music can be annoying, but that Breath of the Wild and new music is so good, it just doesn't matter. Everything from the loud, bombastic boss music to nature's calm, quiet sounds are all perfect. Also, that sound design. It's so crisp and satisfying that they must spend hours perfecting how this game sounds. It's amazing how many minute details there are, from how the paraglider reacts to rain, to how Link's shield only makes noise when he steps with the right foot, and how his arrow only makes noise when he steps with his left foot. Little details like that, which are entirely unnecessary, add so much to this game's immersion. If only they paid that amount of attention to the story and dungeons, then the game would have been 10 out of 10, but you know, whatever. That's all I can really say though. I don't know much about music theory or sound design, so I'm gonna leave that part to smarter people than me. Still, I love every single bit of the music and sound design. It carries so much of the game, it's not even funny. Seriously, this OST is unbelievably good. Presentation wise, I've already touched on it before, but this game is an absolute beauty. It's like walking through a painting. The character designs are all unique and memorable, weapons look cool, the armor looks amazing, and of course, the world. Hyrule is simply astonishing. The way the sun sets and rises is like magic, especially in the sky. I think we've talked about Tears of the Kingdom enough. Why don't we wrap this all up and head to the conclusion. In conclusion, Tears of the Kingdom falls short of nearly every single expectation I had. It barely improved anything in Breath of the Wild, while most of its new concepts fell short. You might say, hey, isn't this your fault for having such big expectations? But to that I say, were they that big? Tears of the Kingdom is Nintendo's first ever $70 game, a price tag that should reflect the game's quality, but it simply doesn't. I'm not saying to pirate the game, even though it's an entirely different discussion, but what I'm saying is that it sets a worrying precedent. A precedent that Nintendo can just reuse the same map, barely add anything, and say, hey, we have this new Ultra Hand, you make the fun. Why would we, the developers, spend time building engaging dungeons or new map to explore when we can just give you Ultra Hand and you make the fun yourself? This precedent might already be set, because from what it looks like, Echoes of Wisdom is just going to be 3D Zelda in 2D. It even basically has Ultra Hand. This is a AAA game franchise, a staple of Nintendo, and one of the biggest IPs in all of gaming. How are we letting it slide? Well, I know why. It's because it's fun. Tears of the Kingdom is a fun game. It's incredibly addictive, but not in a good way. It's not really fun to explore caves and collect Poes. It's just a cool sound effect that satisfies your dopamine. It's easy to spend hours in Tears of the Kingdom with nothing but a straight face as you collect more and more items you'll never use. It's not Zelda addictive, it's Ubisoft addictive, vain, empty, and hollow. On a more positive note, the game has an incredible sense of wonder, and Ultra Hand is a landmark feat of game design and programming. It makes the entire world your own little toy box. I have no doubt that the programmers and designers will study this ability for years to come. The way you can just build anything, slap a steering stick on it, and the game will recognize it as a vehicle is, I have no words for it, it's just phenomenal. That's the best way to approach Tears of the Kingdom. As a playground game like Garry's Mod or something, they use Breath of the Wild's map as a base. But that's not The Legend of Zelda, or what Tears of the Kingdom was marketed as. If they wanted that, then they should have made it a spin-off that cost way less money, and not marketed it as the sequel to Breath of the Wild, just a spin-off for you to make cars in. Tears is a $70 action-adventure game, and the sequel to arguably the best game of all time. That status comes with many expectations, and they're not unfair one. is the game's duty as a sequel and being more expensive to provide substantial and invigorating content, but it just doesn't. There's a lot of content, like a lot, but it all feels meaningless. The exploration got worse, and the abilities were terrific, but they often trivialized much of the game or were heavily underutilized. The combat suffers from the same problems, and what little they did add to the world feels like cheap padding. The only question I'm left with is how. How did this happen? This game had 6 years to develop, but still feels incredibly rushed. COVID definitely took away some of that time, but a ton of other great and similar games were made under the same circumstances. So what happened here? Was it the physics engine? If so, what about the design, story, playtesting? That all feels rushed too. So again, what happened? I just hope Zelda team learns from their mistakes, because they did make an incredible game. It has some of the best moments in the entire Zelda franchise, and I have no doubt many of its aspects will be taught in game programming and design schools for years to come. Yet, it ultimately fell short of the expectations it had. But hey, third time's a charm?